right, hello, here we are. So hello, welcome to the CTO Craft MiniCon, where we'll be focusing on the hiring arc. For those who don't know me, I'm Andy Skipper, the founder and chief coach at CTO Craft. We're a mentoring and learning community for thousands of senior engineering leaders right around the world. Alongside our biannual conferences, we also have a thriving Slack community, weekly Bites events, and a weekly newsletter. And we also run peer learning circles as well as one-to-one CTO coaching. If you're interested in finding out about any of this, take a look at our website or drop us a line at info@ctocraft.com. We've put together an agenda for today which will lead us in order right the way through the hiring arc, from sourcing and pipeline building through screening and assessment right the way to making an offer. When we were thinking about themes for the conference, there was little doubt that the number one difficulty faced by members of the CTO Craft community and the mentoring circles was attracting and securing engineers. There are hundreds of environmental and socio-political reasons why it's so much harder to place good people right now, from the upheaval over the COVID-19 pandemic and its layoffs and furloughs, to the shift from collocation to remote, and then a fractured reversal to hybrid working. The Great Resignation came about exactly when we were at our most vulnerable and has sparked a real fight for good engineering talent, inflating salaries and the need for more flexibility in work. But what really caused the great rethink among workers, and how can we lure them back or prevent them from leaving in the first place? I believe the emergence of a worldwide pandemic, the death of millions, and the realization of how vulnerable we actually were in our working lives, social interactions, in our emotions, has led many to refocus on the meaning and purpose they want in their entire lives, not just the mechanics of how they work. An extension of that is that I believe the most key area we need to be focused on when attracting the best people is to understand how they might achieve true meaning and purpose in the work we offer them. A report created by BetterUp in 2018, before the pandemic hit, discovered that employees would sacrifice, on average, $21,000 in their salary if they felt that they could achieve more meaningful work. It also found that these experiencing the highest degrees of meaning were 69% less likely to leave their companies, and that there were huge productivity gains where teams recorded feeling higher levels of purpose and meaning. I would suggest all these numbers are greater in the wake of COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, and the cost of living crisis. But what is meaning, and how do we promote it when talking to candidates? Meaning can be achieved not just by aligning on the company's mission and values, but also by focusing on personal and professional growth and autonomy, better recognition and shared experience, and social support within the company, availability of coaching and mentoring, and very importantly, understanding the need for balance between work priorities and personal well-being. If you're able to highlight the supportive and meaningful nature of the work in your company in the public auditorium, you stand a significantly higher chance of securing and retaining the best people. With all that aside, I'm going to hand over now to the first of our hiring experts. But first, I'd like to thank some of our biggest supporters, the CTO Craft sponsors, which include AWS, Circle CI, Code Climate, Carrot, and many more. A huge thank you to every single one of them for believing in the CTO Craft mission to help all engineering leaders develop the skills, confidence, and network they need to thrive in their position, create positive and productive teams, and deliver the most impactful value to their organizations. Very quick housekeeping stuff. We'll be monitoring the chat to make sure conversations adhere to our code of conduct, which you can find on the CTO Craft website. So please avoid any promotional or sales messages and keep the discussions civil and respectful. Please use the Ask a Question link to drop your queries to the speakers. Not all of them will have time available to answer your questions, but we'll be keeping a log of any that go unanswered, and we'll have the opportunity to keep the conversations going with speakers in the CTO Craft Slack. To start us off, here's Aline Lerner, the founder and CEO of Interviewing.io, who'll be telling us why we should be micromanaging the hiring process. Over to you, Aline.
Hello. One moment, there's some echo. Let me put on my headphones. Hello, can you all hear me? Okay, great. Good morning to those of you who are in California like me, and good afternoon and good evening to everybody across the world. I'm thrilled to be here and so excited to have a captive audience of CTOs to whom I can preach on the importance of not throwing hiring over the fence. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I do have some slides for you all. All right. So the title of my talk is Hiring Engineers, the One Thing You Should Micromanage. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Obviously, you shouldn't really micromanage anything. But if there's one thing, it is hiring engineers. And I hope I'll convince you that that's the case. Before we get into it, I actually have a few questions for you all. We don't have a way to do formal polls. So instead, I would just love for you to jot down your answers so you can refer to them later. Okay? First question. How many hours do you think your engineering team spends per hire? So this would include things like talking to candidates, interviewing, everything. Okay. So how many hours do you think that is? Okay. Next question. How many hours do you think your recruiting team spends per hire? And finally, and this is a yes or no question, do you, as an engineering leader, actually know what your funnel numbers look like? Well, what do I mean by funnel numbers? That means things like how many of your technical phone screens end up becoming on-sites, how many of your on-sites actually go to offer, and how many of your offers convert to hires. So do you actually have these numbers at the tip of your fingers? Okay, great. We'll come back to some of these a little bit later. So before I get into it, I thought I should introduce myself. My name is Aileen. I've been on all sides of the hiring table. So many years ago, I was an engineer myself, then an engineering manager. Then that was the first time really I had to deal with hiring and discovered it was much harder than I thought and ended up making a left turn in my career and working as a recruiter. I really wanted to understand why it was so hard. I ended up running recruiting at a few companies, including Udacity. Then I started my own recruiting firm. And finally, that windy path led me to starting a company called Interviewing.io. Interviewing.io is an anonymous technical interviewing practice platform. So engineers come to us to practice technical interviewing, and top performers can then connect with companies. We've hosted over 100,000 technical interviews in our lifetime, split between practice interviews and real ones. And a lot of what I'll be telling you today is drawn on the data from those interviews. In my career and later at Interviewing.io, we've helped about tens of thousands of engineers find jobs at hundreds of companies, ranging from huge ones like Dropbox and Amazon to small startups who are maybe hiring their third engineer. And I actually observed the same patterns over and over that separated companies who hired well from those who did not. Now, I know keynotes sometimes tend to lean a little bit fluffy. I thought I'd try to make this one as practical and as actionable as possible. We'll see how that goes, but I'm also going to try to tell you some counterintuitive stuff based on data that you probably won't hear in other talks. But first, I wanted to tell you a story. So I mentioned earlier that I used to run hiring at Udacity. Now, we had a lot of candidates that were coming to Udacity because they were attracted by the mission, and the mission was to democratize access to education. It's a great mission. Of course, people are going to be excited about it. And there was one candidate in particular who said that it had been his dream to work in ed tech. So he did really great in his technical phone screen. We flew him in for his on-site, and he happened to mention to me when I was chatting with him that he had a friend who worked at a company in Palo Alto, which was pretty close to us. And that company actually did not ed tech, but ad tech. So an edit distance of one. And he also told me that it would be his worst nightmare to work in ad tech. But, his friend was really just insisting that he come meet the team while he's there. And he did. Well, you can kind of guess where the story is going. We made him an offer. He turned that down, turned down his dream of working in ed tech, and instead took the nightmare offer working in ad tech. And you know why he did that? Because he had better chemistry with the ad tech team. It wasn't about the comp. It wasn't about the mission or the space. The fact that he hit it off with those people and wanted to spend multiple hours a day with them. And really, if there's one takeaway you get from this talk, you have one main job as an engineering leader when it comes to hiring, and it is facilitating that kind of chemistry. Look, hiring engineers is really, really hard for all the reasons that Andy mentioned, and it's getting harder. This is how you win. Now, try as they might, your recruiting team can't do this. Only you and your engineering team can facilitate genuine chemistry. So before we talk about chemistry, let's talk a little bit about the hiring funnel. This is, your funnel might look a little different than this one, but these are the usual steps. And these are conversion rates in a pretty good hiring funnel. So for instance, about 25% of technical phone screens actually make it to onsite. One thing that you might be surprised to learn is that way more engineering time is spent per hire than recruiting time. In this funnel, it's about 1.5x more. This is why you should micromanage eng hiring, because even though it's called recruiting, it's fundamentally an engineering investment. We should accept that, and then we should own it. So how do we make better use of engineering time? Can we actually reduce the hours that we spend while creating as much chemistry and getting as much juice out of those hours as possible? And I say yes. Every interaction with a candidate should be an opportunity to create chemistry between them and your team. And you should look to your funnel with the same critical eye that you look to the rest of your processes and cut inefficiencies while getting the most bang for your buck. So what can you actually do? This is a list. This is really the meat of what I want you to take home today, and I'll talk about each of these points. So how can we micromanage hiring to maximize chemistry and minimize time investment? First thing, get a handle on your funnel metrics and figure out which sources have the best outcomes. You would be shocked by how many eng leaders are bad at this and don't know what their funnel metrics look like. You know the adage about how you can't fix what you can't measure. Most hiring managers I speak to don't know what their funnels look like. We're engineers everywhere else, but somehow we forget to be engineers when it comes to recruiting. And once you actually figure out what your funnel metrics look like, you might see some unexpected things. I could do a whole talk on how to triage your funnel, but one thing you might notice is that you have a very high technical phone screen pass rate and then a very low on-site pass rate. And that might mean that you might want to move some of the questions from your on-site to your technical phone screen, and so on and so forth. But you won't know stuff like this until you pull the numbers and spend some time with that. And then once you do that, you're going to get a visibility into which of your sources actually have the best outcomes. Once you know which of your sources have the best outcomes, you should actually hop in and do some of the intro calls with candidates from those best performing sources instead of recruiting, right? This is your first chance to create chemistry. First impressions are real. They're a real thing. This is also a great way to build relationship with your recruiting team. I know sometimes there's tension between eng and recruiting. Tell them to rope you in with high potential candidates and make them feel good about asking you to do that intro call. You can scope it to a few hours a week, but even this will have a pretty significant impact on your conversion rates down funnel. Next thing, create unique interview questions that sell as much as they vet. In this hiring climate, every interaction with a candidate should be about creating chemistry. And one of the best, most genuine ways to do that is to ask interesting interview questions that will stick in the candidate's head after they leave. So many companies don't spend a lot of time figuring out what to ask. One failure mode I've seen a lot is going to lead code and asking lead code questions verbatim. You're losing such a huge opportunity to build rapport with the candidate, to show them how cool what you're doing is, right? And to make them think about you long after the interview is over. What I normally suggest is to start a shared doc on your engineering team. And every time an engineer on your team does something that they're proud of, it can be one line of code. It can be a function. It can be a big project. It doesn't matter. Something where they want to share it, where they want to tell their friends, hey, look at this clever thing I did. Just have them note that in the doc. And over time, you will create a repository of these little kernels that then you can turn into interview questions. And these interview questions will be practical. They're going to be specific to what you do. And they're going to give candidates a genuine view into what their day-to-day might look like if they work for you. Next, this one's a little bit weird, but I'll talk you through it. Figure out who your super screeners are and put them on phone screens, take them off on sites. So what's a super screener? So this is a word that I made up, but it's an interviewer whose candidates end up getting offers disproportionately often. If you actually do an analysis of your funnel and look at who all your interviewers are and how their candidates are performing, I guarantee you that you will find a pocket of interviewers who have probably similar technical phone screen to on-site conversion rates, but whose candidates, for whatever reason, tend to do better in on-sites and tend to potentially even accept offers more often. Why is that? Because given enough interviewers, there will be some interviewers on your team who are not only well calibrated, but who are also really, really good at selling. And these people aren't just well calibrated for the phone screen. They have some kind of intuition for who's going to do well in the onsite. I've done a lot of work to try to figure out what makes these people magic. And there are a lot of factors. But regardless of what that is, they exist. So find out who these people are and make sure that you put them on phone screens. Because if putting these people on phone screens doubles your on-site to offer rate, all of a sudden you're spending way, way, way fewer eng hours to make the same number of hires. I put a formula here. You don't have to use this one, but if you want to figure out who your super screeners are, you can use this formula to identify them. The people with the highest scores will be the people that you should put on phone screens. Okay, next, have your interviewers give constructive feedback at the end of interviews, especially for strong candidates. Why does this matter? So on Interviewing.io, like I said, we've hosted over 100,000 interviews, and it's been a treasure trove of really cool interview data. One of the things we ask people after their interview is, how well do you think you did? And this is before they find out how well they did. We also ask people whether they would want to work with their interviewer. And we found a very statistically significant relationship between whether people think they did well and whether they'd want to work with the interviewer. And that sounds a little surprising at first, but if you think about it, right? Let's say you have an interview and you're unsure about how you did, and it really could go either way. And after the interview, and I think we've all done this, you go through this kind of self-flagellation gauntlet, right? Where you're like, I should have said this thing. Oh man, I'm stupid. Or, oh, like that interviewer didn't interview me well. That question wasn't good. And regardless of which of these self-flagellation or flagellating them kind of tracks you go down, over time, over the next few days, you're going to be talking yourself out of working at this company, even though you actually really did well in the interview. And by the time they get back to you and say, hey, actually, you did really well and we want to bring you in, you will have done so many mental gymnastics to talk yourself out of it that you're going to be over it. So how do you combat this? If somebody did very well in your interview, tell them as soon as possible. If you can, tell them right after the interview. I know that not in all processes are interviewers actually empowered to give feedback, but if it's something that your company can do, I would highly recommend it. And let me show you why. So this is a graph of some real data that we have. On the x-axis is their actual score, 1 to 4. 4 means they did very well in the interview. 1 means they did not. And then the y-axis is the perceived score. So that's how well do you think they did. That box in the bottom right that I've outlined in red is kind of the imposter syndrome candidates. And these are the candidates that actually did well, but thought they didn't. And the longer you hold off on giving them good feedback, the more likely you are to lose them. Finally, this one is not surprising, I'm sure. You, as the Eng leader, should do a call with every candidate who's getting an offer. Recruiting might actually extend the offers. Maybe recruiting is handling negotiation, because sometimes it can be weird to negotiate with your future boss's boss. It creates some weird power dynamics. But offer negotiation aside, make sure that you actually do a call with every candidate who's getting an offer. Why? Those candidates are about 15 times as valuable as candidates at the top of the funnel. If you do nothing else but improve your close rate from 33%, which is, pretty good funnel standard, to about 50, you're going to save 31 or about 30 Eng hours per hire and 1.5x your hires if you do nothing else. If you actually do all of these things, doing some napkin math, I think you will save about 45 Eng hours per hire. You'll 3x your funnel throughput, and you're just going to make hiring more human, right? Everybody hates being a candidate. Everybody hates feeling like a statistic. And for how hard it is to hire engineers, I don't think anybody is really doing a great job of this, but this is how you start. And I'm hopeful that if more people adopt this strategy over time, hiring will just suck way less for our industry. All right. I think we have a little bit of time for questions. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Aline. That was brilliant. Okay, right. We do have some questions from the audience. Okay, the first question is from Simon. And his question is, how do you ensure that relying on your super screener intuition doesn't backfire and introduce subjectivity and bias?
That's a really good question. I think the best way to... Do you hear echo? Is it just me? No? Okay, good. So that's a risk that you take. And I think the important thing to do is to keep measuring other aspects of your funnel, right? So if you do adopt this strategy, then keep a close eye on what happens. And if over time you start noticing that certain groups are not passing interviews at the rate that they used to, that's something that you're going to want to take a critical look at. I would say it's probably better to be bold here and lean on your super screeners and then fix issues, rather than being a little bit timid, not leveraging them, and then being afraid of bias. Just make sure you measure, and this goes back to, as an Eng leader, know what your funnels look like and have ready access to that data.
Brilliant. Apologies for the echo, everyone.
I wasn't crazy.
No, it's my fault. It's my fault. Okay, we have another question from Louisa. What tools to use to track the candidate's funnel?
Yes. So probably all of you use some kind of applicant tracking system, or you've probably heard the acronym ATS. That's what that stands for. It's basically a CRM. That's another acronym for managing relationships between you and your candidates. Popular ATSs include Lever, Greenhouse. Maybe if you're at a much bigger company, you're using something like Workday. There's a long list of them. Some applicant tracking systems are much better at reporting than others, but all of them should be able to give you at least a rudimentary funnel. There is, and they're not paying me to say this, there's a new ATS on the market called Ashby, and their differentiator is that they actually let you get your funnel metrics easily. So they will kind of plug on top of your existing ATS, pull everything out, and organize it and tell you what those numbers look like. In the past, when I've done this, I've sometimes just exported raw ATS data into an Excel sheet and just written some nasty Python scripts to do it. Hopefully you don't have to do that. And hopefully whatever ATS you use will give you at least a first pass. And it doesn't have to be perfect. When there are glaring issues, it's not going to be, about maybe you lose some data. Like when there are glaring issues, you will be able to tell. And you don't have to do this perfectly. What matters is that you do it some.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Okay, next one is from Kier. Any advice about how to handle candidates who don't take the feedback well and want to spend time arguing about it or accuse you of bias?
Yeah. So to be safe and to kind of leverage what I suggested, you can confine yourself to giving feedback to candidates that did well, right? Because what you're trying to accomplish there is to not get them into the self-flagellation loop or the self-justification about how they totally didn't want to work for you anyway. Like you want to avoid that and you want them to feel great after the interview as soon as possible. However, I'm glad you asked this question because I was debating about whether to put this little juicy tidbit in my talk. A few years ago, I actually worked with a lawyer to try to figure out if an engineer has ever sued a company for giving constructive post-interview feedback. I know HR will always tell you, like, don't give feedback, it's a liability, at least in the US. And I know not everybody here is in the US, but in the US, this has actually never happened. And as always, HR is sometimes and legal are overcorrecting and in the process sacrificing, some opportunity for engagement. But that doesn't really answer the question, I suppose. If you are giving negative feedback, there is a chance that candidates will become defensive. One of the things that we do on Interviewing IO, because we do give feedback after interviews, if you do feel like giving all candidates feedback, is not starting with whether they passed or failed, but instead getting very constructive and very specific right away. So saying, hey, here in this function, you use this other function and then you didn't account for the additional time complexity that created, right? Or your variables should be named differently, or any number of other things. So by the time you actually get to whether they passed or failed, that is almost moot, right? And it's much more about working through a problem together than judging. People generally get defensive because they feel powerless, not because they disagree that they failed.
Makes sense, yeah. Okay, we have another question from Mark. When you say give feedback immediately afterwards, how soon is that? An hour, a day?
If you can, and this really depends on how your process works. You just may not be able to do this. But I would actually say, like, if your interviewer is empowered, do it right at the end of the interview. If they're sure the candidate passed, and that's not for an onsite. This would be for a technical phone screen. For an onsite, obviously, there's a team of people and they have to meet. So it's hard to give feedback right away. For an interview that's one-on-one, like a technical phone screen, if you can just say at the end, great, that went well, we're going to bring you in for an onsite. If you can't do that, or if you are trying to figure out when to give feedback after an onsite, do it as soon as possible. I know that sometimes it's hard to get everybody in a room to debrief the next day or even same day. I'd say, like, I don't have the numbers for this, but just my intuition tells me there's kind of this exponential drop off for every day that you sit on it. And the sooner that you can give a candidate feedback, the better.
Definitely agree with that. Okay, I think we've got time for one more. We've got one from Fernando. Do you have tips about being a good salesperson without overselling the organization?
Yeah, really, really good question. So the ultimate sales pitch for a candidate follows a very specific format. And that is, one, figure out what they've done up until now, figure out what they want to do, and then find a way to tell the story that everything they've done up until now is culminating perfectly in working for you. And that everything they want to do, they'll be able to do with you. Now, that's easier said than done, because being able to execute on that strategy requires getting a lot of information from the candidate. So as much as possible, especially if you're an eng leader and you're doing those intro calls, spend time asking questions and listening, passing that information on to the rest of your team, being like, this person wants this person wants that. And then make sure that every person who talks to them tells the story of why they're there, right? So you probably have engineers on your team that had multiple offers and then chose to come to you instead of some other place. Why did they choose you when they could have gone to many other great companies? See if they can work that in. Not everybody's going to be able to tell the perfect story of how everything this person ever wanted is going to culminate in working for you. But if you can tell some of that and listen to what they want and pepper it with personal anecdotes about why you're there and why your team is there, you're going to be doing so much better than most companies already.
Brilliant. Okay, I think that's all the time we have for Aline. Thank you so much. That was brilliant, really insightful.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Best of luck. Micromanage hiring.
Thanks very much. Okay, and now we have Mikhail Juhas. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yeah.
Mikhail is going to be talking to us about sourcing candidates. So over to you, Mikhail.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Thanks, guys, for IT sourcing and headhunting, which is what we are going to talk about. So I'll share my screen and I'll show you a few slides with examples of Boolean searches so that you guys can do a little better searches on LinkedIn or on GitHub. I'll also go through a few examples of what do candidates usually desire, because that's what usually matters most, right? If you don't get them interested in your opportunities, then it doesn't really matter what kind of a cool strategy you use to source them, right? So let me just pull the window and share the screen. Meanwhile, guys, you can also write questions in chat, and we will answer them right after the presentation. Thanks, Alex. Thanks. I'm glad you like some of the books over there. Awesome. So let's kick it off with the first one. Hope you guys can see it. Can you see it? All good? Cool. So first things first, I would just like to mention that despite the perception that there are not enough people on the market, I would like to shift the perception to actually remind you that there is more people on the market than ever before when it comes to IT candidates, because the seniors in IT haven't retired just yet. And at the same time, more juniors enter the job market than ever before, thanks to all these boot camps and training courses and Udacity and whatnot. So there is an interesting prediction that by 2030, there will be 45 million developers out there. And now there are around 25, 26 million. So that's quite interesting, right? So there are people in the market. Obviously, the demand increases as well, but the people are there. So we will talk about how to attract them. Okay, we need to also consider the career transitions, which are very important now in the IT job market, because people always desire something. You know, there is this saying that the grass is greener always on the other side of the fence, right? So just to highlight a few of my recent candidates who were interviewed and hired by our clients. For example, Ekaterina, she just wanted to relocate from Russia. That was even before the war started. She just wanted to relocate because she wasn't satisfied with the political situation. And since the last, 2 months, 3 months, we have even more candidates, many more candidates who want to relocate out of Russia. So that's what they wake up with in the morning. They just want to relocate and they look for opportunities. So once we present them opportunities through these lenses, they are much more receptive. I'll show you in a minute how. Or Victoria, for example, she worked for a local bank and she wanted to shift from that local bank to working remotely for a company that was either in Dubai or in Europe, because she was looking for something cooler, something more fancy. She didn't want to relocate, something cooler locally, but remotely, but still in the same city she lived in. Or Harsh, for example, he was a CTO in a great company. He was leading hundreds of team members, and he felt like he's not really challenged anymore. So he wanted to shift to a smaller company. say 200 people in total, probably 50 people in the IT team, but somewhere where he could contribute and steer the wheel a bit further. So that's what he was constantly thinking about, like how can he go from a huge company to some smaller company. Or Jacob, for example, he was working for a year or 1.5 years, and he was looking for a new challenge, something that would get him excited. Or Joe was really interesting. His wife got pregnant, and he wanted to shift from the startup world to working for some more stable company in a corporate kind of environment. So it's really interesting. Once we understand what do people desire, it is so much easier to present them our job opportunities. So for example, you can start thinking and presenting these opportunities through some of the phrases, or you can just speak to their desires. For example, if you have a candidate who is an employee and you assume or you know from the past that he wants to become a freelancer and get self-employed, then you can present him the opportunity, such as like, hey, last time you mentioned you wanted to shift to being a freelancer, and now I have a great opportunity where you can work remotely as a freelancer. We can help you set up your self-employment setup locally. And that's something that resonates very well with some candidates. That just happened 2 weeks ago with one candidate from Romania, where he shifted from being an employee to self-employed. But also sometimes after people are self-employed for 3, 4, 5 years, they want to shift and become employed again. That's really crazy, isn't it? Because, for example, their wives get pregnant. So we can again rephrase it slightly like, hey, are you sick and tired of having this insecure job? Why don't you join our company? It is much more stable and you can enjoy some of the perks and benefits. Or people who work for agencies for 2-3 years, they at some point get frustrated with the projects changing frequently, and they are much more receptive to, for example, product-centric companies. So that's also how we pitch some of the opportunities to people who are working for software development houses, or people who, for example, work for travel companies, travel tech companies. Sometimes they feel insecure and they want to transition to some other industry. So once we understand what do people think about and what do they desire next, it is just so much easier to present the opportunity in a compelling way, because there are so many Java developer positions or front-end React developer positions out there, and they don't really stand out. So our job now, in this, these days, is to figure out how to make these jobs stand out and get people excited about the opportunities. So then, and I'll not go through all these, I just highlighted it here just in case some of you guys want to take a screenshot and use some of these phrases. But these are the phrases we use in marketing to candidates. Like, would you like to increase your net income by working as a freelancer? We have a great opportunity for you. Or would you like to start working for a company based in San Francisco? We have a great opportunity for you. Like, this is something, for example, people in Eastern Europe are very well receptive to. They feel it's very like they just want to work for companies in San Francisco, for example, remotely. That's something that they respond quite well to. So you can take a screenshot if you'd like. I'll not go through all of them because we want to spend more time on some of the sourcing strategies with LinkedIn or GitHub. Or for example, the last one, do you have to go to the office too often, work fully remote like your friends already, right? Like, these are some of the phrases that people are quite receptive to. So the golden rule that we have articulated while recruiting IT professionals in different countries internationally is that if you cannot fill a vacancy in IT, it is because your opportunity is not good enough or you are not selling it well enough on the market. Okay, so if you cannot fill the vacancy, it's either not a good enough opportunity, meaning something with the opportunity is not right. It's probably the salary, or it could be just too much on-site work when people don't want to work on-site anymore, or you are just not selling it well enough. So if you think that the market, the salary is above or at least on the market rate. If you feel that you already offer remote work, if you feel that you already use the latest and greatest technologies, then it's most likely just that you are not selling it well enough. With those examples I shared just a while ago, use some of the phrases, make candidates excited. So speak to their desires, not just pure technologies, because there are so many companies out there where front-end React developers can work for. So rather focus on something special, something unique about your opportunity. So ask yourself these two questions. First, are people on the market with the skills you need? Just as an example, we had one client who was looking for a senior data scientist in one of the cities in the Czech Republic. And there were just very few data scientists, really 4 people probably, who met the requirements, and none of them wanted to change the job at that time. So, if there are people on the market, that's great. If they are not, then you need to change something, right? And second, do you offer a similar compensation package as your ideal candidates already have today? Again, we had, for example, one client that was offering 30% below what the market was asking for, and they were surprised they cannot really get anyone to join the company. And I'm like, guys, but look, you are offering 3,500 to a senior Python developer. There is no senior sane Python developer who would work for this amount of money. But they're like, well, but that's our ceiling. And I'm like, well, so then you need to change something, right? You can sell it as much as you want, but so anyway, so ask yourself these 2 questions. And if you answered yes to both questions above, and you are still not filling your vacancies, then either the opportunity is not good enough or you are not selling it well enough. Okay, so if there are people on the market, if there are data scientists in New York, which they are, right? And if you offer a decent package, then you are just not selling it well enough. So it comes down to your ability to get people excited about the opportunity at hand. And if you answered no to the first question, then you should rather expand the market. So start looking for people remotely. And if you answered no to the second question, then you should rather rethink your compensation plan. What I've noticed while working with developers, especially in Europe, is that they are not as interested in the employee stock option plan, and rather they value the cash in hand. So that's quite a change compared to the candidates from the United States. And I would suggest you guys also discover your gaps. So what do I mean by that? So if you don't get enough candidates, then the potential problems could be either very few people see the offer itself, which means you are not promoting the opportunity enough, or a lot of people see it, but they don't apply. Okay, so the opportunity itself is not interesting. So you can really break down the whole funnel, the whole hiring or recruitment funnel, to just a few yes or no's. Essentially, once you understand the data behind it, behind how many people apply and at what stage of the funnel they drop. So if not enough people see it, then you need to do more marketing towards candidate. And if they see it, but they don't apply, then the opportunity itself is not interesting. It's not compelling enough. The market desires probably more cash in hand, or I don't know, some other compensation. At the same time, if you get a substantial amount of candidates, but you don't hire any of them, then you can have 2 problems as well. So you can either have inefficient or long interview process, which I also see with some of our clients. We submit them great candidates, we do lots of search, we headhunt candidates, we introduce them to the best of the best, creme de la creme IT candidates, and then it takes them 6 weeks to interview candidates. And I'm like, well, guys, but it doesn't work this way anymore, and it's just dragging forever. So it's hard. If you work in a larger company, in a corporation, then it's hard. I know there are some processes and whatnot, but also some of our clients are trying to reinvent the whole hiring process internally, just to make sure that they can give an offer within 7 days to a candidate. And second, a lot of people apply, but there are no great candidates. So it just means there is mismatch between the budget and the expectations, which also happens with some hiring managers. I hope it's not your case, but sometimes hiring managers have this idea about the ideal candidate, say a data scientist who used Python with all these libraries and worked with huge data sets, etc., etc. And then the budget is $60,000. So, because the budget is pushed by the CFO, but the hiring manager expects someone very senior. And that sucks, of course, because the hiring manager hasn't reset the expectations. Like if the budget is 60,000, then the expectations about candidates has to be readjusted. So I would like to highlight this because it's sometimes hard to realize it while you are in the flow. You are probably interviewing some candidates here and there, you reject them, and you haven't thought what's going on, like why you may not get the results you desire. So this could be the issues. You either have inefficient process or you have mismatch between your budget and expectations. So then after you realign, then prepare your pitch. Prepare your pitch because otherwise there are lots of opportunities for backend developers, front-end engineers, data engineers, Python developers, etc. So those are relatively similar, but what makes it stand out is your team or your product or your specific opportunity, your company, your culture. So you need to prepare your pitch. And then the question is, how do you pitch the vacancy, right? So is there something interesting about the product? Is it high tech? Is there something interesting about the project if this is some software development agency? Is it, for example, a project built from scratch that's quite appealing to a lot of people out there, especially senior ones? Or is there something interesting about the company? For example, the company has just fundraised and is expanding heavily. Or are there any interesting team members? Maybe the CTO, maybe there are some open source contributors. So feel free to take a screenshot of this mind map. We use it when we onboard new clients and we try to identify how to pitch their vacancies so that more candidates feel that this is the dream job for them. Okay, and then rewrite your job descriptions because you can start approaching people and send them your JD, but if that sucks, then you will not be very successful anyway. So change the title to be very straightforward. Make sure that you don't send to candidates something that is very fluffy or something like developer evangelist, which people don't really understand. They may not really know who the developer evangelist is. Who are you looking for? So just make it very straightforward. For example, backend Python engineer. Make sure that you have good hook. It's like marketing, right? Like these days, recruitment is about marketing and sales. So make sure you have a good hook. Make sure that you can pitch your company with just a few sentences. Avoid the industry jargon. This is really hard, by the way. This takes probably 15 minutes to figure out with a team. They often cannot introduce their company in a simple way. So that's quite crazy, isn't it? So make sure that you go through this exercise yourself so that you can actually pitch your company and add pre-screening questions. Yes, someone is just mentioning Josie. Yes, definitely. That's such a cool thing, right? Pre-screening questions on the JD. It's such a help on the job description because it helps candidates identify if they are a good fit or not. It also helps recruiters to quickly spot who is a fit or not. And I like to distill the super long list of requirements to just 3 must-have skills. It's often just the programming language. It could be, for example, experience with microservices and fluent English. And the rest usually is just fluff. Now I'm mostly talking about backend engineers, for example. Okay, and when you have this, then you may also want to go further and prepare some compelling landing pages where you will direct the candidates to. I'll just show you a few examples. This was for one client. So instead of sending the long job description, we show them like, hey, are you a backend PHP developer? Watch this video below with a CTO. Or another example, are you a PHP full stack developer? Start coding Symfony and Angular, click here to get more info. And this way we can capture their contact details at least. And that's what you can also do. Or open positions in Bratislava. These pages just screenshotted next to each other in different stages of the. Are you interested in data jobs? Yes, especially in data engineering. Can you use Python? Yes, of course, or no. So this way we can pre-qualify candidates really quick. Or the dream job show, which I organized, that's a fun way to pitch those opportunities. So you can, if you are a CTO or you are a team lead, tech lead, then you can also just get the video and hit record, talk about the opportunity, talk about why is it cool, what do you expect, but don't focus on the requirements, but rather what kind of challenges do you expect the developer or IT professional to solve going forward. So yeah, there's one video. I'll share the slides if you'd like to watch, for example, this video. Like the thumbnail is terrible now when I look at it, but you will be able to watch how do I pitch the opportunity. This is some startup from San Francisco. So instead of just enumerating the requirements, which is super boring, I talk about what an awesome team they are, open source contributors, and they can work remotely from Romania or wherever. So that's quite a cool way. Okay, and then once you have all these in place, then you can start using LinkedIn to source candidates because you have something to show them. So you have three options. First, you can use the LinkedIn free version. That's good for those of you who are on a low budget and you just want to do some free search. I just want to highlight that there is this option, all filters, and I would suggest you guys use the title right here instead of just the keyword. Because if you type front-end developer, then LinkedIn will search across all profiles and their about sections and whatnot. So the keyword front-end developer can appear anywhere, even in previous positions. So it's not very efficient. If you put to the title, then it is a bit better. You will get more targeted audience. I'll show you some Boolean operators later. The second option is LinkedIn Recruiter Lite. This is much better. It costs about 100 euros, 120, $150 probably, based on where you are. And this is the Lite version, by the way. The advantage is that you can have advanced filters. For example, you can have the job title, Java architect, like super simple, not even a Boolean search, but you can use it. I'll show you some examples. But what is really cool, you can see it here with the second arrow, you can include only those people who have the title currently. So not in the past, not a year ago, not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago, but right now in the present like tense or status. Okay, currently. You can also use some Boolean operators in keywords. You can look for people with certain experience, so 6 to 30 if you are looking for some seniors. So this is much better. The third option, which some people use, is the LinkedIn LinkedIn Sales Navigator. The Sales Navigator is also a good way. It's a bit cheaper than LinkedIn Recruiter Lite. Lee just mentioned it's £200 per month when you pay monthly. Well, that's quite a lot, isn't it? So LinkedIn Sales Navigator is the second option, which some people use, even agencies. I consult for some staffing agencies and they use it as well, just because it is cheaper and it offers similar functionality. You can get more emails through LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So it is worth, you have pretty much similar filters. So the advantage of LinkedIn Recruiter Lite is the projects. So you can attach some candidates to projects. In LinkedIn Sales Navigator, you can attach them to some accounts or save them as leads. So it's slightly different. But anyway, it really depends on how far do you want to go. In agencies, they usually have LinkedIn Recruiter Lite. And I'll show you a few Boolean operators. Usually when we conduct search, we go, of course, further. We don't just use front-end developer. We are just scratching surface with such a filter. But you can, for example, consider different alternatives. For example, test or QA or quality assurance and engineer or specialist or tester, but not lead, not manager. Okay, so this you put to the title. So essentially here, to the current title. So with this, you will get combinations such as test engineer, QA or QA specialist, quality assurance specialist. So just with one Boolean search, you are able to get much more targeted result. Okay, then to keywords, which is the other, where was it here? Keywords here in the middle, you can put something as advanced as not manual and in brackets, Russian or Russiski or Russian or whatever, right? Ukrainian. So we were looking for one client, people who are in Poland, but they speak Russian. So yeah, like different combinations. And then we can split the group, which would be about 500 people. We can split them by seniority to smaller chunks. For example, 50 people who have 3 to 4 years of experience, 4 to 7 people who have 200, 7 to 10 people who have etc., etc. So a group of 1,000 candidates, we can segment to smaller pieces. So this is just one of many examples. Full stack PHP engineer, you can again take a screenshot just as an inspiration. You can see we were looking for the PHP engineer. So obviously the PHP in the title is the most efficient way. And then you have PHP and developer or programmer or engineer or desarrolladora or desarrollador. I don't know, like all these translations, because especially outside of the United States, people still use their local language. For example, in Spain, if you just go to Google Translate and you translate the word developer, you would find you would find out desarrollador, because I cannot even pronounce it, but they have the masculine and feminine words, right? So you consider both with Boolean. And that's super exciting, right? Like you can get the search to the next level with approaches such as this. You can see also some additional skills that could be applied to this search. So very cool. One of many ways. Front-end React engineer, again, you can have different searches. You can start with something very broad, like front-end developer, current or past in Austria, but you would have 900 people, which is way too many to go through. And then you can have, for example, in the title, React or React.js in Austria, and suddenly you have 14 people. It's probably too few. So the one highlighted is probably one of the better ones, like front-end or front-end or front-end, because sometimes people have front-end together and sometimes with a space. Not full stack, not full stack, not full stack, because yeah, we were not looking for full stack developers. And in skills, they should have React, React.js, but not React Native, because we were not looking for mobile developers. Okay, and these 67 people, they were great. Or these 22 people, for example, developer or engineer, not lead, not manager, but in skills, React and React Native. You see, so there are so many different options. You can put the keyword front-end or front-end or front-end with dash or space. So this is just one of many examples. And second thing I would like to highlight is that also GitHub can be used to source candidates, especially for some more advanced developers. For example, we were looking for an engineer who focuses on some video encoding, right? So the first step is to understand what does it really mean, video encoding. It means that that person would use some video encoding codecs, right? So what are the codecs? What do people use? We identified some keywords, for example, FFmpeg or WebRTC or HCL. And then on GitHub, we were looking for people who had worked or contributed, or not even to contributed to FFmpeg. There is not that many people, but people who used in their repositories FFmpeg, because FFmpeg is the codec for video and audio encoding. So people who use FFmpeg in their projects are very likely to have projects that actually do some video encoding. So this is a cool way, and then we just create some spreadsheet and we approach these people, and we had really great candidates coming out of this list. So GitHub can also be used, especially to find backend engineers, people who use some of these more advanced libraries or tools. But even, I mean, front-end developers, you can go after React or Angular developers out there, just based on what kind of libraries do they use. For front-end developers, I would say is better. But for something as advanced as this, GitHub worked better. So yeah, and I showed you some mind maps. So if you'd like to see, and there is about 40 mind maps with lots of different Boolean operators, Boolean searches. So if you would like to get like all of them, then just go to IT Recruiter mind maps, and you can get the whole list. That could help you, because in those mind maps, I have some of these Boolean searches, so you know how to just apply them next time you look for full stack engineers or backend developers, front-end developers, QA engineers. So all these keywords are included in those mind maps. So that could also help you. Okay, so essentially 2 ways on a high level, LinkedIn and GitHub. You can use them, but before you start approaching people, don't forget to reset your mindset. Make sure that you think it through properly before you start approaching people. Make sure you you think about the pitch itself. Once you approach people, you pitch the vacancy properly. Okay, so with that, I guess we wrapped it up. And if you guys have any questions, then I'm ready to tackle them.
I think we're probably just a little bit over time at the moment, I'm afraid, Mikhail. But all the questions that we have, as I said in the chat, we're logging them all, and we're going to put them up in Slack. So there will be an opportunity to get those answered.
Awesome.
But thank you very much, Mikhail. That was fantastic, very insightful, very detailed.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And up next, we have Ola Sataska, who's a senior development manager from Shopify. Who's going to be talking to us about diversity in hiring. So if we can bring Ola up on screen, that would be great. Ooh, do we have Ola? Okay, here we go. Hi, Ola. Good to see you.
Thank you. Super excited.
Grand. Okay. Well, over to you. Tell us about diversity in hiring.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen now. Great. Looks like you can all see it. Super excited to see here. I'm actually in a Shopify office today, which is not normal for us because we work remotely now. So this is a bit different than usual. I'm going to talk about effective and inclusive hiring process. So shortly about my experience, early in my career, I got an opportunity to build a team of 40 engineers, with about 35% of them identifying as women. And that was at Pollen, which is a tech startup primarily based in UK. Since then, I also taught interviewing skills to about hundreds of engineers at Onfido, and now get an opportunity to witness this massive hiring program at scale at Shopify, which obviously has some lessons on its own. So I'm going to use all that experience to tell you about how to hire better. Firstly, when I talk about inclusivity here, what I really mean is giving you the biggest chance to fill your open roles with the best candidates out there, no matter what their gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, past experience, or education. You need the best people in your roles, and you're likely not getting them today, as they're either never showing up in your pipeline or never successfully going through it. So if you're 90% of our industry, you might be missing out on all those people who don't quite fit the usual narrative. And we'll talk through your hiring pipeline in those 3 stages, starting at the very top. And we're going to start with talking about how you can expand your pool of candidates and set up your process so it does surface the best out of the available pool. So step 1, grow the pool of your candidates. Based on my experience so far, that is perhaps where it's that's the hardest stage, because how much time you or your team spends here will directly affect the results. Over time, there's a few practices that I found useful. Michal was just talking about sourcing candidates, and there were some questions in the chat about whether you should source yourself or not. Obviously, that will really depend on your environment, but as an engineering leader, I find that directly reaching out to candidates who are not common in my pipeline in like a very genuine, authentic, and personal way, so like optimizing for quality of those reach outs rather than quantity of those reach outs, is super, super important. You have so much direct influence over this step. And it really disproportionately affects the diversity of the pipeline. Even today, actually, like just a couple of hours ago, I got information that we placed a candidate who was a woman into my team, and that was because I reached out to her 2 months ago. The way I do this, I spend time on this myself, but I time box it. So I spend an hour every week. There's a scheduled time in my calendar as any other meeting, and I expect all of the managers reporting to me to do the same. At work, we also had really good results through organizing like dedicated sourcing parties and training our team on how to use LinkedIn, how to reach out to people, and getting everyone involved into like sourcing together, or making that part of like expectations for performance as well, as we believe that like building the team is part of everyone's job at work. There is a shortcut here. If you don't have time, there is a lot of sphere of companies that are specialized in and like spend the time and put in the work into building trustworthy networks of diverse candidates in those communities. So if you don't have the time and you don't want to spend your time on sourcing, this is a great shortcut that you can go through that will like meaningfully impact the front of your pipeline. But then a chance might have it that when you're writing your job description, you're getting inspired by a bunch of ones that you found on the internet, and there's probably a high chance that they've been inspired by other ones, and they've just been all copied and validated and modified from someone else over and over again. So what I would encourage you to do here, there's like a few principles that I take into account now when writing a job description, which is rather than asking for specific skills or characteristics, just describe the actual activities or objectives this person will be doing in their job. As an example, rather than saying that you need 5 years of experience in React or open source contributions to GraphQL, just say that in this role, you'll be building a React Native application that's powering the point of sale app for Shopify, used by millions of users every month. That way you're not describing like someone's specific career path, specific life path they went through, but describing what they're going to have to do on the job and letting them self-select into whether they think they can meet those expectations or not. And that way, like you basically don't look for like a specific model of a person, but you're looking for, can they do your job? Which I generally just think is much more effective, because there's a bunch of studies about how women only apply if they meet 100% of your checkboxes on your job description, and men will apply if they meet half of them. So that's something to take into account. Secondly, avoid gendered language. And that's not just like inclusive pronouns, so rather than saying, he, say them, but also make the job more balanced by avoiding languages that come across as competitive or aggressive. And there's plenty of like online language checkers that can easily point those out for you now. So with those 3 things, hopefully you're in a place where you've activated a bunch of those people who otherwise would never even apply or never end up in your pipeline. And let's focus on what to do next, which is you want to ensure that your hiring process actually supports you selecting the best candidates out there. Before we go into like how you screen, we'll focus on how to set up your candidate for success. So not everyone interviews well. And actually, if you're looking for software engineers, interviewing is likely not a skill that they are very familiar with when it comes to practicing it every day. And what you're looking for when it comes to like a core skill of a developer is them being able to solve complex problems and build reliable systems. That's not necessarily the same thing as interviewing. So my biggest point here is that you want to make sure that you don't that your candidates' interviewing skills don't get in the way of you learning about what their programming skills are like. And there's a couple of things that I want to point out here that might be helpful. Firstly, I think you can be more transparent about the interview process with your candidate. Letting people prepare in order to show you their truly like best side of themselves is not really going to harm your process or let people cheat. You're actually going to end up having like much richer conversations about topics you and your software engineers care about. that will also have like the side effect of helping candidates that may have like a stage fright or just be really nervous about like what's going on and the unexpectedness of an interview, to tame that stress a little bit. And through that, they will perform much better. So it's all about minimizing stress. Letting people know what's coming is one way to help that. But you could also help candidates minimize it by letting them choose the interview at preferred times, with the preferred breaks in the middle of like a long stack of interviews. Or if you're doing a system design interview, even letting them choose a preferred tool that they're going to use to like draw those boxes in could go a really long way. Lastly, don't forget about providing some like easy accessible accommodations. A good examples I've seen before is a candidate who stuttered. They may need slightly more interview time than others. And there's plenty of ways where you can find super easy accommodations that you can provide that will make for a better candidate experience. And I think the best way here is to just ask people like, how can we set you up for success? Like, how can we make sure you show us your best skills in this interview? So now you're confident, you're getting the best out of every candidate, and you've got the best candidates into your pool. It's time to figure out how to determine who is the best for your job. This is quite similar to the point that I was making about job descriptions and making them inclusive. Because at this point, you're hiring people to do an actual job with an actual objectives. You know what those are, you've written them down. So the entire goal of screening is to verify if they can do those things well in an environment that's similar to yours. When I say similar to yours, that means that a job of a software engineer at a 3-people startup is going to be super different to a software engineer at a 12,000 people tech company. So you want to make sure you take that into account as well and look for those actual skills they're going to be using day to day. And most importantly, don't screen for a proxy of skills. So what I mean by that is you don't want to like, if you are looking for someone who's going to be writing a web application every day, you want to know whether they can design a system that will solve your user's problem. And testing for whether they can solve this arbitrary algorithm is not necessarily going to give you that. So that's one point here. But then once you have those questions, you have to find a way to use objective criteria to determine what the success looks like. That does sadly mean you need to not just design the questions and think of those, but also have a long, hard think about what you want to hear as answers. I generally tend to go with less questions than more. Like these days, I settle on 4 questions in an interview that we go sort of deep on and try to expand as much as possible. And that lets you like really well measure the depth of how complex they can go. But in any way, you have to predetermine what an amazing and good enough and not good enough answer looks like, and make sure you have a system, like a scorecard in place to ensure that all interviewers are able to apply that objectively. One additional thing here I do is when talking to interviewers about, how this experience with that person was, when they say like, oh, this person is very experienced, you have to ask them like, how do you know this? And I encourage interviewers to take loads of notes, ideally with quotes, so they can then recall specific examples of things that person has mentioned that made them arrive on this person is great judgment. Because I think it's a lot harder to be subjective when you have to support your feelings with facts and quotes and things you've actually heard and examples that you were given in an interview. Lastly, control for biases. All of us have them. And they really influence how we approach people we meet. With some, you will get along great and you'll find the interview super easy, the conversation will flow. With others, you may find it really hard to make a connection. There are 2 practical tips that I tend to teach all interviewers. Firstly, just before the interview, like 5 minutes before, read the list of most common interview biases. Just like, find on the internet, get them on the top of your mind. And this allows you to a lot more easily spot yourself applying them throughout the interview. Secondly, after the first 5 minutes of an interview, do like a little gut check with yourself on like, what do you think of this candidate? 5 minutes in, are they great? Are you feeling great? Are you excited for this interview? Or are you not feeling like it's going super well? And then act the opposite of your feeling. So if you're feeling very positive, make sure you're staying strict to the questions and the criteria you have. If you're feeling negative, try and engage with the interviewer as much as possible and ensure you're setting them up for success in the interview. That controls for the biggest bias of we tend to go easy on people we like and we tend to go harder on people we don't like. So doing this fairly small trick will allow you to control for a lot of the biases that get in the way of you determining who is the best. At the end of the day, I'm super confident by putting in a little bit more thought into designing an end-to-end hiring experience that's super intentional. You'll be able to build a team composed of people who otherwise wouldn't even be on your radar. Because all you have to do is find the best candidates for your job, right? And you don't want those biases, you don't want your job description that's not written in the best way, or anything else that gets in the way from preventing you to reach people who otherwise wouldn't show up in your pipeline. Thanks for having me, and you can find more about this on my Twitter.
Thanks so much, Ola. That was brilliant. And very, very important topic, obviously. We need to do a lot more in terms of the process of hiring, I think, and the inclusivity of how we approach it. But yeah, very, very important. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay, next up we have Luca Rossi and Joel Chippendale, who are going to be talking to us about creating job specs and job adverts, which is also a very important topic. So I'll hand over to you both. Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Joel Chippendale and I'm talking to Luca today. Luca Rossi is a former CTO and head of engineering, and he's now the founder of Refactoring FM, which is a weekly newsletter about engineering leadership, which I personally find really useful. It's full of practical and insightful advice. I've got a few questions to kick things off with, but obviously you've got the ask a question button there. Please put your questions in, and we're going to slightly accelerate this session so you still get a break. So forgive Luca and I if we speak faster than usual.
Yeah.
I'm particularly pleased to be involved in this chat because job ads are such an important part of the hiring process. It's where people first see you. To kick off, Luca, what should you include in a really good job ad?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me, Joel. Really happy to be here. I would start by saying that I've had the privilege to run the job board for the refactoring community for a while. And so in addition to having hired engineers for many years, I've now kind of behind the curtain, look to hundreds of job posts and how they perform with hard numbers about views, number of applicants, and so on. So as a good engineer would do, I've been trying to draw correlations, about what content performs better and why. So you will be hearing my own take, kind of backed by numbers, okay? So the first thing that we should consider when thinking about what goes into a job post is that different people are motivated by different things. Okay, so there are engineers, for example, who really care about some technology. Okay, so they will look for a job where they can apply some tech. Others are motivated by some domain. So they may want to join some fintech company or Web3. And others, care about culture or stage of your product. So they may look for early stage startups or remote and synchronous friendly teams. So you don't really know that in advance. So my feeling is that your best bet is to create a job post that is very informative. So I don't think there is even such a thing as a too informative job post. Okay. And I've seen that the top performing posts usually are pretty clear about three main areas that are the company, the position, and the interview process. So the company means the vision and mission of your company, like from here to a number of years. It includes the context, like where are you now? Are you raising funding? Are you growing? Have you just raised funding? And this has been especially relevant, in recent times with the downturn many layoffs, as you may have heard. So people have become very cautious about what kind of company they're joining. And then the position, of course. So, of course, what does your team look like, what they're up to, your responsibilities, technology stack, your salary range, and so on. And finally, one piece that is often overlooked is the interview process. So, like, where do we go from here? How long does it take? What are the interviews like? How do you prepare for that? So it is important because for people, this is a very stressful part. So many, don't want to put themselves into like processes where you have 10 to 15 interviews across 2 months time. Okay, so I don't want to throw shade to anyone, but I think we all know some companies who do that. So if you describe the process and make people feel this is doable and it doesn't take too much time, it can make a big difference. So these are, I think, the 3 main areas.
So I think that's really interesting. You're talking there about the interview process being valuable to share with people, given that Ola was just saying from a diversity perspective, that's really important as well. What's good for diversity is good for everyone is coming out here.
It's good for everyone, I think, especially, if you, and we go out of the job post topic for a little time, but if you invest in having a hiring process that is lean, that includes a few interviews, like 4 to 5 interviews across just a few weeks, it pays off to describe it and tell people that is doable for them. Okay, that they don't have to do this crazy preparation in advance and put in this effort. And really, you can also help people preparing for the interviews. So you can double down on it, including resources to make them perform better in the interviews, aligning, the incentives of everyone.
It's great to hear. I wonder what you think about including salaries in job ads or not. I know a lot of people ask questions about that.
Yeah, I've always been a big proponent of including the salary range, honestly, but only recently I've had, the hard numbers to back this up, because job posts that include salary ranges routinely on my job board, and then talking with hiring managers that are friends, routinely get 3 to 4 times more applications than others. So it's insane, and that includes even job posts where the salary range is kind of in the lower end, okay? Because it's not about the money itself, it's about the commitment, okay? So the candidate feels that there is a commitment by the company that is stronger and is more, trustworthy than otherwise. And this is not just useful for the candidate. It creates alignment, from the get-go, and avoids you to get into situations that you really don't want to put yourself into. Because let's say you don't include the salary range and you go through the whole interview process just to see your offer refused by the candidate. That is a massive failure of your process, because at that point you have invested like tens of hours, for hiring managers, engineers, stakeholders from other roles, and think that maybe you have found a really great candidate that people are looking forward to work with. And everybody is extremely pissed off that when candidates do not accept your offer, right? Because they were already feeling how it is like to work with these guys. And of course, you have invested so much time, so there is a real economic value to it. I think it's really important, not just for the number of applications and conversion rates, but also, to simplify negotiation and alignment.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. It sounds like there's a bit of a theme developing here about being transparent with candidates through the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was really interested to hear those stats around the numbers for salaries being shown on job ads, because I know lots of people are nervous. What if people think our salaries are low? And it sounds like even there, if you're putting it out there, it's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're touching a good point, because many companies will tell you that they do not include salary range because it gives them an upper hand at negotiation. I mean, aside from the fact that this is not true, I think at all. But I think that there is a real, sneaky reason sometimes, that is that publishing the salary ranges also brings transparency internally. Okay, and some companies are kind of not ready for this because they have salary brackets that are totally messed up. I mean, in the engineering space, you see this all the time. You see peers with incredible pay gaps. You see managers who earn way less than their reports. So people are not always comfortable at publishing, transparent salaries because they had to do their homework first. But it absolutely pays off if you do.
Yeah. It tells you something about the culture within the company and how they're approaching that openness. That's great.
Yes.
Is there anything you see people putting too much of into job ads? You said be very, communicative, share lots of information. Is there anything you see too much of?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer probably is no, because you might say you should always include information, and if you don't want to make the job post itself too long, you can include further links, to additional materials for candidates to deep dive if they want. But if I have to mention something that maybe people put too much of, this is probably tech requirements. I've seen many companies being really prescriptive about things that can be easily taught and learned by candidates in a few months' time, at most. Okay, and I think this is a mistake, because it's easier in this market usually to hire smart people than experienced people. And people often, understate how fast smart people can learn what they don't know. That, of course, kind of shifts the perspective and puts more burden maybe on you internally on developing training and things to assist, junior engineers and people who join. But I think that's a good investment, because at least that is something that is 100% under your control. Okay, you can measure it, you can improve it, make it better, and so on. While instead the pool and the number of candidates you get for your positions is not 100% under your control, right? There is the market, there are other factors. So I think it's a worthwhile investment.
Great. So what's the most common mistake that you see people making when they're writing their job ads?
If I had to say, again, short answer, naming just one thing, I think the most impactful mistake that many people make is not including the salary range, because they really don't know the impact that this has. I mean, on the number of applications, and also, on situations that you mentioned before. But I think in general, if we had to identify a more generic theme, is that sometimes you take things for granted about your company and you don't include them in the job post, not thinking that they are useful to the candidate. You know the saying that goes that where you're in the forest, at some point, maybe you see the trees and you don't see the forest anymore. So you tend to think that people know your company, while instead you should put yourself in the shoes that really don't know anything. And maybe they will, and they will do their own homework after they've seen the job post. But you have that chance to convert people and make people interested in what you do as total strangers. And so you have to be very convincing and informative, like you would be pitching your company to an investor.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder. It's all too easy for us to assume that everyone understands our company and that everything that we do in our company is just normal.
Exactly.
And it's different. And yeah. Can I ask a question from the audience here, Luca? So we've got, is A/B tests for job posts a thing? That's asked by Mateus.
I've never done such a thing myself, but I have to say it depends. As for, general A/B tests, it depends on your pool of applicants, and if you, receive many applications. I mean, if you have a large pool, you receive many applications, and so numbers are statistically significant. You can try different things. Of course, you can try to put different, things on different platforms, but usually you don't have such a luxury, And when you have, at least in this space, so it's hard really to draw conclusions on testing different ads.
Yeah, unless you've got hundreds of candidates coming through.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. One other question from the chat from Mayank was, how do you negotiate with a candidate after a range has been shared? And I think they're worried that you will be forced to the upper end of that range if you shared a range.
Well, it really depends, right? The first answer might be that, there are various components of the salary. So there is, the compensation, there might be a signing bonus, there might be equity, there might be, if you are office-based, relocation packages and other things. So I think even if you do not share the salary range for any reason that would be reasonable or not, it is wise to have an early discussion as early as in the screening interview. So, to limit the damage of not talking through these things until the very end. And then I think it's totally fair to be fair with the candidate to follow up to the theme that you have mentioned, to be fair and open to the candidate about maybe not feeling like going to the ceiling of the range right now, but maybe focusing on the growth opportunities within the company, sharing how it works, with performance reviews, with career opportunities. And, in my experience, if the candidate thinks that they have a real opportunity of growth personally and professionally, and as a byproduct for compensation in the company, they tend to be less focused on the here and now. Okay.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, Luca. Have you got any last advice that you want to share before we wrap up?
I think we already covered many things. I think people should really care about job posts as it was about selling and pitching your company, as I said before, to an investor, to someone who has to invest in the company, because the candidates and the employees, it is what they do. Okay, so spend time and effort on that. I mean, read it out loud as it was a story, as it was a pitch. Okay, make proofreads with other people in the team who are not involved in the creation and writing of the document. So people are smart and have good ideas, but they have to have the time to write them down, to think through it. And sometimes in many companies, the writing of a job post takes too little time to let good ideas emerge and refine the content as it should.
Thank you. I think that's a great thought to end on. Imagine that your candidates are investors in your company, thinking about investing years of their life working with you.
It's true.
Pitch it in that sense. I think that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Luca. That's really
Thank you. Thank you, Joel, for having me and all the CTO Craft. Thank you.
Thanks so much, chaps. That was brilliant. Very enlightening. Okay, right. We're going to take a quick break now. We're going to be back in about 10 minutes. So if you want to make a beverage, go ahead. We'll see you all soon. Thanks.
Hi, Emma. How are you?
Good. Andy, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you.
Great. Well, Andy's sorting his audio issues. Emma, do you have any good jokes?
I've got guitars there. We could go all David Brent and just, fill for a minute if we wanted.
Yeah, wonderful.
Although I have to say, I did shout if anybody grabbed a cuppa, and I can see Paul had said lemonade. Just be really sad. I'm on dandelion and burdock, and I'm the proper Yorkshire lass today. But our gathering, Andy, is coming out and going back in again. There we are.
There we are.
Speak to us, Andy. Can we hear you?
Yeah.
If not, I'll just jump. Give me the thumbs up if you want me to just jump in and start going. Okay, we'll just crack on.
We can handle this on our own. Thanks, Andy.
Yes, welcome back after the break, everybody. Still have a few more sessions to go. Laura and I are going to be chatting all about tech assessments. So I'm Emma. I'm Chief of Staff at 101 Ways, a tech consultancy. My background is coaching, transformation, technology. Laura, do you want to just do a quick intro as well?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Emma. I'm Laura Taco. I'm a VP of engineering and an engineering leadership coach. My background is mostly in infrastructure and DevOps, developer tools. Recently, I've been working kind of outside of the developer tool space to get a bit more experience across lots of different sectors. And it's been interesting and eye-opening to see how many common problems fintech, health tech, ed tech, developer tools, all these different companies across different sectors have when it comes to hiring engineers.
Awesome. So yes, the session today is about tech assessments. Do ask any questions you like as we go, pop them in and I'll have a look at them as we go and just feed them in. And I guess I want to start with why we do tech tests. I hear an awful lot of groups whenever we get people together and start to chat. One of the main questions that comes out is, well, are we still doing them? Does it, what we get out of them? I hear some people aren't doing them at all. So yeah, what's your thoughts on that? Why are we doing tech tests? Are they important still?
Yeah, it's such a wonderful question to start with, especially in the hiring market as it is right now. So I did an interesting poll on Twitter last week where I asked if a candidate completely gives code that doesn't compile or doesn't run in a technical assessment, can they still pass? And I was actually surprised that I think it was about 75% of people said, yeah, of course, because we're not really assessing whether the code compiles. In a technical assessment, what we're looking for is patterns of thinking, technical trade-offs, architecture, design patterns, those kinds of things. How the person communicates, do they Google? Can they use Stack Overflow appropriately? Those kinds of questions. So it's more about putting the person into a situation that is as close to real life as possible so that they can get a sense of what it's like to work with you and you can get a sense of what it's like to work with them.
Cool. Okay, I know when we do tech tests when we're hiring for it's not about the tech. It's about how did they approach that challenge? What do they like to pair with? But I guess, does that lend itself then remote versus in person, and how you do those tests and how you execute those tests then? What difference does that make in how you plan it and execute it?
Yeah, there's a lot of different styles of technical assessments. So if you, some people in this audience, I'm sure, have never done one, because it is common for some companies to just completely skip it, because you can look at someone's resume or perhaps a referral or a recommendation from someone, and that counts enough. But for those of you that have done a technical assessment, you've probably had one of these flavors of technical assessment. There is the whiteboarding interview that gets a lot of public dunking because it's all about algorithms and not really about, building software. Very few jobs have you invert a binary tree as part of your daily life. That's one style. We have the in-person interview, which is, sometimes a pairing session, or sometimes it can be, here's a problem, you have an hour in this room, go and do it and come back to us with an answer. And then we have a take-home assessment, which can last anywhere between maybe just an hour to you might have a couple days to do the assessment. Adding remote in kind of changes the experience for the candidate and the interviewer, quite honestly, a little bit. So with a pairing session, you're going to be on a shared terminal, over Zoom or some other tool in the background versus sitting next to each other. But those are kind of the main categories of technical assessments that companies like to use.
Okay. And do you have a preference? I know, in fact, it leads into one of the questions that's already come in from Jeff, says about the balance between asking candidates to do an async test screen early in the process, like part of an initial phone screen. I guess that's taking things away and doing a way test and filtering out, versus looking for that more of that pairing and that bouncing and that communication style. And I know when we were chatting before, there's that view of actually, does it lend itself to filtering out some of that bias as well if it's anonymized and offline? So what are the pros and cons of some of that then?
Yeah, this is a big question to unpack. So let's start with the time actually in the interview sequence that the assessment comes with. So you asked me for what's my preferred What's my preferred assessment? And I am a big fan of take-home exams, but very specifically, I'm a fan of take-home exams after you have done a synchronous technical discussion interview stage. So you have to look at the technical assessment not just in terms of its standalone, but you have to look at it of what other pieces of technical information are you getting from the candidate at the time they receive the technical assessment. So if I were to give a take-home exam to someone as their very first interaction with me, if I'm trying to hire them for my team and I say, hey, please go do this 4-hour take-home exam, they're going to look at me and be like, are you nuts? I mean, this is so disrespectful for my time, is generally what the candidate is going to think, because you're asking a whole lot from them without giving them any indication of what is in it for them, what they're getting in return. So I find that giving the candidate a bit of time to have a discussion with the team, understand the tech stack, understand what's important, actually helps them perform better, more like real life on the technical assessment, on that take-home assessment when it comes to them later in the interview. That leads me into this question that you asked about bias, and can a technical interview remove bias from the process? So there are a lot of tools that say, no, you should start with a screening, with a technical assessment screening, maybe not a full take-home test, but maybe it's a coding challenge in order for the person to even enter the interview process. Bias comes in many different ways, shapes, and forms in your interview process. Evaluation and a technical assessment is just one of them. So all of these tools that promise that we can remove bias by giving you an anonymous technical screening, they're just lying to you, because there is, assessment of technical coding exercises is just one part where bias comes in. So you have to look at it holistically. It can help reduce it, but eliminate it, that won't happen just from one tool. So sorry to all the people who have been maybe have bought into those marketing promises, but they are just marketing promises. It's just one thing. It's not everything.
Actually, there's another question on it as well from the audience, from Joe. It's one about the balance. It says, how do you balance accessibility in its various with technical assessments, i.e. take home implies that they've got time and they've got the tech and the facilities to go and do that, versus in person, maybe in person is not so friendly to neurodiversity and things like that. So yeah, there's what are you actually asking of people? Like you gave the example of a 4-hour test, maybe is not what you want to kick off, but how do you go about designing a good test then for candidates?
Yeah, that's such a great point about, just by the structure of the interview step itself, you might be including or excluding certain people. And that's exactly what I'm, the heart of what I'm trying to get at when I say that an anonymous coding test can't remove bias completely, because simply by including certain interview stages, we're adding bias. So a person that can complete a 4-hour take-home exam most likely doesn't have caregiving responsibilities, or they have enough support that they can have someone take care of their children or their aging parents. They have a development machine at home that they can use outside of work hours. They are not in school, they have free time to do it. So when I think about how much I want to ask of someone, I think 2 hours is really the maximum that you can go in an interview stage without getting to the point where either the candidate feels like they're doing unpaid work for you, in which case the solution is simply pay them. And some companies do that. Instead of a technical interview, they might just have a project and pay the candidate to complete this project. And then at the end of the project say, you know what, this was great, we want to hire you. Or they say, here's your money, we're not going to move forward with you. And it's a bit of maybe a fairer way in some people's opinions to do that assessment.
What about the overhead of doing that, I guess, internally as well? Because depending on where you do it in the process, the interesting stats and things that we had earlier about, how wide that funnel has to be at the start of it. It could get quite an overhead for your people as well. If it's pairing, if it's reviewing, it's just that internal overhead. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it can be very heavy organizationally, logistically, quite a heavy lift. So there are some ways to do this for you. You can certainly orchestrate a lot of it. You can have standard GitHub repos and some standardized things internally to make it really that the heavy lift that you have to do is organizing the time with the candidates and then organizing the time for reviews. The other way is using a tool. There's one that I really like to use called Code Submit. They don't pay me, maybe they should, but I use it for not only orchestrating, but they also now have like a pairing functionality in their tool. So instead of leaving it up to the candidate and leaving it up to your interview panel to figure out like, okay, what's the tooling? What are we going to use? You just give them a link and it's really easy. It saves a ton of time. So as remote becomes more prevalent and we start getting a bit more educated about what technical assessments work and which ones don't, you should expect to see more tools like Code Submit come on the market that can help orchestrate the technical assessment part of your interview process.
This is usually the point where I expect to see the chat window going mad with everyone recommending the tools that they're using as well.
Yeah, there's surprisingly not a ton, like there's not a ton that do that packaged start to finish experience that's great for the candidate, which is really important, but also great for the reviewer.
Another interesting question we've had in is, I guess, around the balance of technical interview versus cultural fit. So this is from Ed. It says, what's the reasonable proportion of tech interview versus cultural fit? 50-50 is the question. Is it the same for more highly specialized roles as well, as in you're looking at architecture or leadership or particular technology, or how do you balance out the skills that you need?
Yeah, this is a really thoughtful question. And serendipitously, I was just talking to one of my coaching clients about this morning. So I have a very fresh answer. And this is how I explained it to them. We know about the T-shaped developer, where we have the general skills on top, and then we have the T that goes deep into one thing. When I'm looking for a candidate and trying to assess if they're going to fit into my organization, that T part is not just their general technical skills, but it's general professional skills. So, I think that there's some companies in the past, or maybe there's room to say, well, this person has a really specialized skill set, so they're not very good at communication, they're not very nice to work with, they alienate people, but we need to overlook that because they go really deep into this very specific skill set. I think that's a very unhealthy attitude to take, and that is going to be damaging to the team that you are trying to build. So instead, when I think about that T-shaped developer in that generalist skill set, there's non-negotiables in there about, I wouldn't say culture fit, but culture add. And I think Jesse is going to talk about that in the session just after this one, about how you create a great engineering culture and how you can hire for it. But those things are non-negotiable for me. And then the generalist skill or the technical skills add on top of it. I've found in my career, and I've interviewed, probably over 500, maybe close to 750 candidates at this point. In the last couple of years, that the technical skills are always the easiest ones to teach. And it's those cultural skills, communication, product thinking, those are really difficult to teach. So if I'm going to bring someone into my org with any skill gap, I want to make sure it's the skill gap that's easier to teach and easier for them to acquire.
And presumably then that's what you're testing for. So how easy is it to design a test? Or do you recommend that people are designing their tests, or are they like using a tool to go do that for them? If you're not testing, if somebody knows the particular code to solve this problem, you're testing for how they solve a problem. How do you get people to assess that and to really know what they're looking for?
Yeah, this is where that bit of art and science comes in, and I think was it Luca or in a previous session mentioned that it's amazing how much smart people can learn. So if you're looking for someone with a lot of experience or someone who's very smart and is very adaptable, you're probably going to have better luck finding that person that's very smart and very adaptable and can acquire those skills quickly and is interested in learning. I see technical assessment as it's not everything. It's just one piece of that whole hiring arc as we're talking about today. So it's really important to understand what signals you're getting from other parts of the process, and then where the technical assessment fits in, what gaps are being filled by that technical assessment, and then what questions are still left unanswered that you need to find an answer for somewhere else.
Interesting. We are just about out of time. I've posted a couple of links into the chat as we've been speaking, which is so one of the blogs that Laura has written around eliminating bias in your tech interviewing. Is there anything else, Laura, you want to wrap up on? If someone's just starting and it feels like it's going to be a massive overhead and they don't really know where to go and how to frame up what this interview process is doing for them right now and what tech tests are adding, where should they go? Where should they start?
Yeah, I think one place that you can start is go to my website, laurataco.com. Last summer, I interviewed about 15 engineering leaders, specifically about hiring and building diverse teams. And I wrote a very lengthy blog series about all the different steps and everything that goes into it. It's on the bottom of my homepage. So go there. You can also subscribe to my newsletter. I do write quite a lot about hiring, about measuring performance, developer productivity, performance management, all of this stuff that's related to building a high-performing team. So check it out. I'd love to see you there.
Great. Apologies for not managing to get to everybody's questions. Hopefully Andy is back up now and his microphone working. Are you there?
Testing.
All right, Andy's back.
Thanks very much, folks. That was brilliant. Grand. Okay, next up we have Jessica Zwan, who is she is at Whereby, which is a video call business. She's going to be talking to us about assessing for culture fit /ad. Hi, Jessica. Good to see you.
Hi.
Great. I'll hand over to you.
Hi, everybody. Just checking that you can hear me okay. Hopefully you can. Great. Okay, perfect. I'm just getting, my internet is not great. I'm in the process of moving house currently. So I am sorry to say that my life is in shambles, to kind of say the least. So I appreciate everyone's patience with me. And thank you so much. So I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to race through this as quickly as I can. I just wanted to say thank you so much to the amazing session beforehand. I think a lot of the conversation there from Laura was, really spot on and definitely reflects the same thinking that I share. Cool. So we're going to talk about hiring for culture fit. I've tried to make this a little bit interactive, but first a tiny bit about Whereby myself. Basically, I think the answer to this is relatively easy, or at least I'm going to present it as such. The two things that we're going to think about is culture as a marketplace and how to identify who your key market is in that frame. Great. So a bit about Whereby. I'm not going to give you the full spiel, but just so you know, in context of everything I talk about today, Whereby is a tech product. We are on a mission to create a world where anywhere works. We are a fully remote business, and we are a video conferencing platform that works directly with developers that are developing any kind of application or website or tool or product that requires video meetings or video conferencing built into their software. A bit about me. I am Chief Operating Officer of Whereby, but before that I have a background in people, operations, legal, and in talent. And I've been working as an advisor and mentor to many different startups and companies throughout Europe as well. Great. So first question. Every time we see a pink slide, that's going to be a place where I'm going to be reading the comments looking for answers. Right now, every single person on this chat is building two products. One of them is the product that you are selling to your customers, but what is the other one? If anyone can type into the comments what they think the other product is that they're building is, or how to describe it. Great. We've got the team, the culture, the team. Yes, so I think this is broadly on the right path. The way that I think about it is that you're building two products. You're building the product that you're selling to your customers and the product you are selling to your candidates. I think about culture and your team or your company as a subscription product. And every single month, all of your team members are choosing whether or not to continue to subscribe to that work experience, to that employee experience, to the culture, to the team, however you want to describe it. And if someone decides to hand in their notice, that is them essentially severing that subscription that they have with your product. So when you're taking that mindset, I think it is generally, much easier for engineering leaders, product leaders, commercial leaders to think about how to build a team when they're wearing that product hat. So that's how I always speak about people operations. And that's the way that we're going to speak about it today. So if we're thinking about your culture as a product, then all the different companies out there is a marketplace. Employees have this huge, beautiful, vibrant marketplace of different types of cultures and companies that they can go and work for, and yours is just one of them. So the best way to stand out in the marketplace is to have an opinion, to know what kind of company you're building, and to be doing a really good job of that. That means that you're going to be attracting the kinds of people that will help you strategically. And it also means that you're going to be retaining the kinds of people that you want to continue to subscribe to your culture because they're a good fit for you. Laura made some great points about wanting to make sure that you have team members that have good communication skills, that care about others, that are respectful. The session prior that was talking about diversity and inclusion in hiring. All of these things, in my opinion, are kind of table stakes. I agree with Laura that these are non-negotiable things. So I'm not going to say today, let's work out how to assess whether somebody is respectful, because if someone isn't respectful in an interview process, that should be point blank, right? You should have mechanisms making sure people are respectful, that people aren't racist, homophobic, sexist, etc. And those checkpoints should be happening throughout the entire time you have people working in your team. However, there are many things that some people might find really difficult or unsavory or uninteresting at your cultural marketplace that they might love in someone else's. I worked at Goldman Sachs, and that is a culture that is very specific. Goldman Sachs is almost like aggressively good at talking about what kind of culture they're building. And you know what you're going to get on the tin, right? And some people love it and some people hate it. And that's totally fine. Goldman Sachs knows who they are in the marketplace for culture. If you're thinking here and scratching your head saying, I don't know who I am in the marketplace of culture, or, we're just a nice place to work, then that's a bit about what we're going to talk about now today. So the question really here is like, what are you hiring for when you're saying you're hiring for culture fit? Pop in the comments what you think you're hiring for. When you read this topic come up in the assessment today, thinking about the complete cycle of hiring, what did you think that I was going to talk about when I said the word culture fit? Was it values? Was it kindness? Was it friendliness with other members of the team? Silence. Nobody had anything they were thinking about. Relationships, getting along with others. Okay. Company values. Great. Someone that looks like me, the values of the company, shared values. Okay. Values is coming up a lot. I think values is a really interesting point, right? But values is just one part of what a culture fit is, because culture fit, especially when you're just thinking about things like empathy, values, integrity, these things are very, very subjective, but also these are kind of a bit ephemeral. It's difficult to figure them out, and people may have different opinions about what they are. The way that I like to think about it, using this culture as a marketplace analogy, is the person that we are speaking to part of our key market? Is this the person that we want to attract to subscribe to our product every single month? Is this the kind of person that's going to attract other people to subscribe, that are going to help our team get value out of their subscription? Is this our key demographic? Is this the right person for our subscription product? And to discover that, you really need to understand two things, right? The first thing is, what kind of company am I actually trying to build? You need to understand, what is the company that I'm trying to build? What is it? What am I trying to build in this marketplace of culture? And that is a mix of all these things that you've mentioned. It's values, it's your shared principles, it's your ways of working, it's the behavioral expectations of your team. These things all encompass what is this company that I'm trying to build? And you really need to have that codified to actually figure out the next question, which is, great. So who is the person that's going to love that? Who's the person that's going to walk past our market stall and say, this is the place for me, I want to subscribe here? And And to do that, what you need to do is just answer a kind of a series of questions and be opinionated to make some decisions. There's no right or wrong answers to a lot of these things, right? Are you trying to build a company which is highly skilled or has high volume? It's really difficult to do both of those things. So you need to have an opinion. Are you looking for people with PhDs, or are you looking for bootcamp graduates? Are you looking for a really lean team, small team with high impact? Or are you looking for a team that's super broad, massive, everyone's optimizing a like button? Are you flexible and T-shaped? Are you highly specialized? Are you central or distributed in your decision-making? How transparent are you going to be? You have to understand all of these trade-offs so that if you bump into somebody along the way that sees your high-skilled, lean, remote team and says, I've got a bit of experience, super broad. I really love working in an office, but I love your product. You would say, that's not the right fit for us. We know clearly, because we've decided on all these trade-offs, what's the right fit for us. So to help you on the way of thinking about these trade-offs, this is what Whereby has landed on. So we have 6 organizational design principles, what we call them, sort of very nice name, but it does the job. And at Whereby, we've selected these 6. So we're biased towards top talent. We really care about every single part of our organization as having the top talent that we can get in the marketplace, and we've assessed our compensation accordingly. We're lean. We don't hire for the sake of hiring. We definitely don't hire anyone in administrative roles. We want people to have very T-shaped roles and also be very flexible. And that's really important. Those 3 principles work very well together. If someone's hyper specialized in WebRTC, which is what Whereby is built on, and has no interest in flexing through different parts of our tech stack, it's going to have to be a no from us, unfortunately. And the reason is because our org design principles require this flexibility and this T-shaped operating model in order to be successful. That's what keeps the rest of our team happy and thriving. So we can't break away from that. Diverse and inclusive, that should be an obvious one. This is like table stakes now for companies, but we made sure that this is the heart of everything we do. And finally, tech enabled. This is really useful for other teams outside of engineering. I think Eng and product are always great at this, but tech enabled for us means we don't hire people whose job is to fill in spreadsheets. If there's no clear path to something more engaging, more flexible, more T-shaped, more career progression, we're not going to hire that job. And this is what kind of drives all of our decisions alongside our values. And we have both of these 2 things at work when we're assessing who is going to fit into our culture. And we ask specific questions on these topics. So this is usually what I do at a workshop. We don't have time to do a workshop, so I'm going to give everyone a minute. And what I would love you to do is just think through this alone in terms of your own company. This is the way that I would suggest you actually think about these trade-offs. And it's figuring out who is your product and who do you want to be buying it? So one of the first kind of trade-offs I would suggest you think about is something like employee skill versus leverage. How skilled do you want your team to be versus how much leverage do they have? And here's a kind of spectrum of where I see some different companies. High skill is like PhDs, and high leverage is like these individuals touch 20% of our revenue every single time they do something at work. And you may be all the way up on the DeepMind end, or you may be closer down to like an ecom. And that's totally fine. But what this helps you do now, and maybe aspirationally, where do we want to be in 5 years' time, is figure out okay, great. So this is actually part of our culture. This is the way that we want to attract people. This is what we should be assessing for. And this is something you can assess in skills, but it's also something you can assess in whether people are going to enjoy working in this kind of company that you're building. So take a minute and think about this. I don't expect you to be thinking of your answers, but the homework I'd suggest you take away from this is go away and actually think, what are the important organizational characteristics of our team today and in 5 years' time? And actually, are we assessing these throughout the process? Are we just looking at values? Are we also looking at how we want people to work together? And this is where the second point comes through. I realize I have 1 more minute, so I'm actually going to have to go really quickly go through this. Sorry, I know there's a lot of stuff written here, but it will be shared. So once you understand what the principles look like in practice, you need to ask the question of, is this person a member of this key market, right? So work backwards from your principles, which is what we've done. And what we're going to do is I'll just really quickly show you diverse and inclusive, working backwards, thinking about some questions you can ask in an interview process. So the question we would ask here is, well, what does someone who cares about DEI look like? What would they say about how they think about diversity, equity, inclusion? Answer that question and then think, okay, great. Now that I've got an answer, what does someone care about DEI look like? they would look like somebody who would prioritize DEI efforts in terms of how they have honest conversations. They would think about other people and how they feel about critical feedback. Great. So if that's an answer, what's a question? What's a question that the answer is this somebody that looks like cares about DEI? And then just build those questions out. Make a big list of interview questions that align with your organizational principles and your values, and ask them in interviews. That's really the best way to do it. Then what I would suggest you do, I'm going to skip this activity, I'm sorry to say, because I'm running out of time and I really don't want to disappoint Nick or anyone else in the team. I want to make sure that I get this done. But my next workshop here would be for you to really think about, like, what would a good answer and a not so great answer look like to these kinds of questions, and kind of make that material for your team. Because again, this is very subjective. What might be a good answer to somebody that hasn't got a lot of experience interviewing looks very different to somebody that really deeply cares about these org principles and is building the team along your side. So kind of codify this for your team. Great. This is my last slide, and then I'm going to hand over. I'll make sure these slides are sent out. But my 4 top tips for success in assessing culture fit are: clearly codify what good looks like in your team. Clearly codify what bad looks like as well, right? So really get the answers to the questions of what are your org design principles, what are your values, what are the questions, and what is a good answer and what is a bad answer. Remember, there's no right or wrong answer. There's only a right answer or a wrong answer for your culture and organization. Don't go copying what other companies are doing, because other companies have their own market stalls they're building, right? The only way you're going to stand out is having your own truth and standing by that. And finally, I would say that the last top tip here is to expect articulate and evidence-based feedback from your team. So often I see really great engineering leaders build these wonderful processes and then allow it to fall at the final hurdle when their team just writes not a great answer and leaves it at that. Really demand better from your team and raise the bar so that their subscription's worth something month on month. That's it from me. If you have any other questions, please do just send them through on Twitter. I'll be online tonight and I'm more than happy to answer them. Sorry for going over a couple minutes. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jessica. That was really insightful. So yeah, just to reiterate, we're going to be sharing Jessica's slides along with all the other slides in the event. So yeah, don't worry about screenshots and so on and so forth. We're all good. Grand. And then next up, we have the wonderful Roy Rappaport. Hope I pronounced your surname properly there, Roy. Who's going to be talking with Zoe, who I think is going to be joining the screen in a second, to talk about candidate experience design. So I will hand over to Roy and Zoe. Do we have Zoe here? 1 second. Let's see if we can bring Zoe out. There we go.
Hello.
Hello, Zoe.
What a great talk that was. That was an amazing session, wasn't it?
Wasn't it just? Okay, I'm going to leave you to it.
Thanks, Andy.
I think if you ever invite me again, I would prefer to go after somebody who's not good at their job, because this is going to be kind of bad in comparison.
I am super excited to have you here, Roy. This is Roy Rappaport, who is the Director of Engineering at Netflix. He's been in tech for over 20 years with positions in IT, engineering and operations, software development, and software quality engineering. And Roy, I think you have a large hiring challenge, not just because of the scale, but also because you have a multidisciplinary tech requirements at Netflix. And can I ask you maybe to tell us a bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Well, I think that maybe, forgive me, I have a small and simple brain, so I tend to sort of decompose everything into atomic parts. I would say that my journey has essentially sort of progressed on 2 axes. One is sort of like the technical stuff, and I've sort of mostly oscillated between IT and engineering. I think most of my life, I've spent half my professional life in IT and half of it in engineering, though these days I think that the lines between them are potentially a little mixed. The other journey has essentially been between being an individual contributor and then being a first level manager, being a second level manager. And at this point, I'm actually the lead of leads. So there are managers in my organization that don't report directly to me, but who report to leaders under me. For me, what I've always prioritized when I've considered taking a job is essentially like, what's the next most interesting thing in front of me? rather than career progression. So if you look at my LinkedIn profile, which is relatively accurate, though of course full of exaggerations about what I've accomplished, you'll see a lot of movements between being an IC and being a people leader, because it's never been important to me to sort of maintain a smooth progression. Does that answer your question?
I think so. And yeah, hello, I'm Zoe Cunningham. I'm a director at Softwire, where I have a number of responsibilities, including hosting our Softwire Tech Talks podcast. Now, I'd like to just take the opportunity before we start to say that we would love to, I'm speaking on Roy's behalf here, Roy would love to answer questions from the audience. So please do put them into the question panel. Could I ask someone from CTO Craft to clear the ones from the previous session as well, so that I can be sure that they're questions for Roy. And yeah, and in the meantime, let's talk about the fact that there are only so many hours in a day, right? Because you have requirements to bring people into your team, and you have some team members to help with that. But what kind of overall percentage of your team and your team's time is being spent on hiring?
I don't know how much of this information has gotten across the Atlantic or Pacific, depending on who we're talking with. I'm not going to assume that everybody here is from Europe. Netflix is going through a bit of a rough time at the present. It's now public knowledge that we had a wave of layoffs about 2 weeks ago. It's public knowledge that our finances are struggling a little bit. So I would say that the amount of time we're spending on hiring right now is actually a little lower than normal, because frankly, we're not hiring as actively as we would have been, for example, a year or so ago. It's also difficult because to some degree, essentially, how much time we spend is, well, again, proportional to how many open positions we've got. I will tell you that right now in my org, we literally have no open positions until about a week and a half from now, when one of my managers is going to be leaving. And at that point, I'll be looking to hire. At that point, anybody who would be involved in this, so if I'm the hiring manager, I would expect to spend a good 20 to 30% of my time on filling that one position. As a matter of prioritization at Netflix, the assumption is that secondary to production emergencies, hiring takes priority.
Fantastic. And I've just scaled that up in my head. So once you have 5 open positions, that's it. You can't hire anyone else. Is that right? Or does it, have you got economies of scale?
Well, I think I'm just a mediocre leader. I wouldn't be able to hire for 5 different positions at the same time, given the amount of effort that is expected to be put into every single position. So if I've got 5 of the same position, I need 5 back-end engineers. That's not a big deal, right? Because essentially, the pipeline is the same. But we tend, in general, and we've been trying to figure out scale, but in general, we have looked at every position as every team's position as relatively bespoke. And so if I ended up with 5 different positions in that I'm responsible for, frankly, I'd be chatting with my talent acquisition partner who'd be like, look, we can make very slow movement on these 5 positions, but we shouldn't. We should prioritize them aggressively. And in general, our preference is to not try to have a hiring manager focus on more than one role at a time. Now,
Right,
the role
yeah.
of multiple positions in case you're looking for, similar people. But I personally don't. I personally don't work on more than one role at a time. Think about it from like writing code and everything we know in terms of like limiting work in progress.
Right.
It's a similar.
Yeah, not splitting your focus. I love it.
Yeah.
And so if you need a talent acquisition manager, they go to the top of the pile, do they? In terms of which role you're recruiting for first.
Well, potentially, except that I would argue that I have the ability to move forward without a lot of partnership from our talent acquisition people, because I can and I should reach out independently to people out there and have ongoing conversations. So in my ideal world, when I have an open position, I already know somebody who I think might be great. I've already had a bunch of conversations with them. And then all I really need is some people to interview them, and relatively lightweight engagement from our talent organization to deal with basically scheduling and all of that sort of like logistical stuff.
Amazing. So we've got questions coming in already, and the first one is very similar to, or it's in the same sphere, I think, as what you just said about reaching out to people yourself. So do you ever kind of recruit in reverse order, where you come across someone great and then you find or create a position for them because you can see that they will add to your organization, even if you didn't know it beforehand? Sorry, I've paraphrased a little there, Mark. I hope that's okay.
I do something slightly different. My primary responsibility is not necessarily to Netflix, but I would argue to the tech ecosystem as a whole. So I would say I have a lot of conversations with people outside of Netflix where I get to know them, and I try to sort of see what they're good at and what I can do to help them. So I think it's quite often actually been the case that I've actually like found somebody great and, you know, was thought that the right role for them would actually not be at Netflix. And then I've made introductions to people outside of Netflix. If there is a role for them at Netflix, that's great. We can potentially see about filling that role, creating that role. It's less likely to be the case, I think, both right now because we're a little more constrained on headcount. So I have to be a lot more thoughtful about it. And I'm doing a lot less opportunistic hiring than I would be, let's say, 2-3 years ago. But also because I think one of our cultural values here is essentially a pretty hard-nosed, you create the right organization and the right organizational structure, not you find the structure that works for the people you want to have here. So we tend to shy away from modifying the organization to make great people fit here. We tend to be relatively sort of focused on what is the right structure for the organization and have some trust and belief that we'll find great people to fit that structure, if that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense. And it leads seamlessly onto the next question. Did you know that? So the next question is, Netflix has been a little in the news around employee disgruntlement around content on the platform. So I think I know which instance is being referred to. And you've just mentioned that you have this intentional culture. So does this feed into your hiring? How does it affect your hiring? And is there anything Netflix would change after this has happened, you know, in hindsight?
Well, are you asking me to speak on behalf of Netflix here? Look, I'll be blunt here. And I'm aware that I'm assuming we're being recorded, and I'm certainly not going to say anything here that I wouldn't be willing to say to Ted Sarandos, my CEO. I have friends and frankly ex-romantic partners who are trans. I have trans coworkers, and I have friends who are trans who used to be coworkers but who left the company because of Netflix's stance on content that some people will say is transphobic, some people will say is simply offensive to trans people. One of the things I appreciate about Netflix, and it's a little hard to swallow sometimes, is that Netflix has been willing to be relatively clear about its priorities, even when that makes people unhappy. And I think that's frankly the most, or maybe the least, or maybe both, we can ask from companies. Like, be honest about what matters to you so people can make the right decisions for them about whether or not they want to come to the company, whether or not they want to stay at the company. A good example of that is the fact that Netflix recently went through another regular iteration of modifying its culture memo. And one of the things that it explicitly said was, we are going to have content on that you may have a problem with. And you will need to decide whether that's enough of a problem to not work here or not. And that's a personal decision that everybody's going to make. I don't think Netflix is walking away from that. Every indication I've had is that at every opportunity Ted has had to reconsider that, he has doubled down on that perspective. and Ted, by definition, speaks for Netflix in a way that I don't. I think it does affect our hiring because some people, based on that information, will choose to not come to Netflix.
And it's right, but like you say, at the end of the day, if the organization is clear, it's not like they're saying one thing, they're saying come and work here, and we'll make sure that we are only sharing content that reflects these values, and then not doing that, right? That's a very different thing to saying this is what we are, you choose if you want to work with us or not. And then within the organization, right, that's a choice that you have to make as well as the people that you're hiring, right?
Yeah, and it does create, profound challenges. I just went through a week-long seminar here for Netflix directors and above that was entirely around the philosophy and ethics of leadership. It taught us nothing. One of the things I've described, I've said to people is I have never thought so hard and learned so little. But the ethics of what we do are complicated, and maybe there are companies where that's not the case. One of the things I struggle with and wrestle with is that these trade-offs hurt people. And working here essentially means I work in a company that makes trade-offs that hurt people. Sometimes they're hurt because they opted into a system that eventually lays them off. Sometimes they're hurt because we make content. And so we have a profound effect with 200 million members out there to influence the conversations out there. And that's something that everybody who works here needs to figure out a way to be sufficiently okay with to stay or leave.
This is such an incredible chat, and we have so little time left. I can't believe it. I want to, thank you so much, Roy. Just to echo the chat for your candor, it's just making for an absolutely fantastic session. So a comment from Louisa: hire fast, fire faster. How do you fire people at Netflix, or what are your criteria for firing people?
The biggest, I think, miscommunication we have, the biggest misperception people have, I think, about Netflix is the whole idea of hire fast, fire faster. I think we've gotten pretty decent at hiring fast. We don't really particularly fire fast, I would argue. And if you look at our internal stats, our first year termination rates are something on the order of, I think, far less than 3%. So I don't think that less than 3% people leaving within their first year feels to me like firing faster. I think what it means for me, having been here for about 13 years and having managed people for most of that time and having terminated my fair share of people, is this. I think every leader goes through a process of, when somebody's performance suffers, of trying to work with them, and then at some point losing faith that this is going to work out. And in a lot of other companies I've worked at, once you've lost faith that this is going to work out, you talk to your HR group and you start a lengthy process of figuring out essentially how to terminate that person. The difference is that at Netflix, once you've lost faith that somebody's going to be able to work out, then the distance between that day and the day that they get terminated can literally be like several hours. So I'll give you an example. The first person I ever fired at Netflix, I went to my HR person. It was Wednesday, 4 p.m. And I said, I've decided to fire Bob. And she asked me two questions. She asked me, is he going to be surprised? And what do you regret the most? And we had like a 20-minute conversation. And then she said, okay, we can be ready by about 11 a.m. tomorrow. And I said, he's working on something right now. How about next Tuesday? And she was like, that's fine. It doesn't mean that we sort of throw people away quickly, like I think the impression from the outside is. And I'll give you another example. When I rejoined Netflix, 2 of the 3 leaders I had working for me, people expected that I would fire. And frankly, people would have been surprised if I didn't fire. And I started working with the first one because I tend to serialize these things. And I remember having a conversation with her where I was like, this was December 2019. I was like, it's clear to me that you personally and your team failed in 2019. And if I fired people for failing, we would be having a very different and last conversation right now. But I fire people because I no longer have faith they can be successful. And I have faith in you. So that was the end of 2019. She was an engineering manager. She turned things around. About a year and a half later, I promoted her to director. She's doing amazingly well. So does that give you maybe a slightly different perspective?
I think that's a fantastic perspective. And I think it kind of really matches what I've seen be successful, right? Which is it's a really good way of describing it, like when you lose faith in someone. But before that point, you have the opportunity, or you have an obligation, I think, as a leader to support and help people and definitely communicate with them around, certainly, I love the question, will they be surprised? How often do you get that right?
Netflix or me?
You personally, just because I'll tell you where I'm coming from. I find that however much I think people aren't going to be surprised, they're surprised more often than I would expect.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Have you worked much with Israelis?
Not a huge number, a few.
We're kind of jerks sometimes. Like the default failure mode for Israelis, I feel like, is kind of like blunt jerk. And it's a failure mode that I try to be responsible for. I was born and raised in Israel. But I don't know that I've found a lot of people from my culture who tend to be surprising on that front. So no, I have literally never surprised anyone when I've terminated them. But that's because even within a company known for candor and bluntness, I have something of a reputation for being an outlier for candor and bluntness.
Right. Whereas the British, we're all like, I'm sure I said something really strong, whereas what I actually said was like, oh, maybe you could just try a little bit harder or something similar.
I will tell you, one of the things I've told my org, and I came up with this in 2016, because there are people at Netflix who can be afraid of like, I'm going to get terminated and I'm not going to see it happen. And I'm not going to see it coming. And it has happened, though not with me. In 2016 was the first time I actually solidified a promise to everybody directly reporting to me, which is this: if your job is at risk, you will know that because I will use the phrase, your job is at risk. If I have not used that phrase and you're asking yourself, is my job at risk? The answer is explicitly no.
What better note to finish on? Thank you so much, Roy. This has just been an absolutely incredible session. And my two takeaways are candor and prioritization. Like, do one thing at a time. Fantastic advice.
Thanks, Zoe. It's been lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
What an amazing talk. Yeah, just to echo what everyone said, really appreciate the candor there, Roy. And, yeah, learned a lot from that. Grand. Okay, let's move on to our closing keynote of the day. We have Jacob Kaplan-Moss. He's going to be talking to us about making job offers. Can we get Jacob up on the screen? Ooh, hello, Jacob. Hello, Jacob. Good to see you. Grand. Oh, you're on mute, Jacob.
There we go. How's that?
Fantastic. Look at that. I think we potentially have matching headphones. It looks like it's just me on two sides. Anyway, I will hand over to you, but thanks very much for joining us, and we'll speak again in a couple of minutes. Over to you.
Lovely. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So we've heard a bunch of fantastic information about all the stages of the hiring pipeline. So I guess I'm here to close it, to talk about the last step of hiring someone, which is actually making an offer. I want to start with a story about my friend, who I'm going to call Phil. Not his real name, also not a real picture. This is a stock photo. But Phil's someone I've known for most of my career. We're at similar points. We've been working in various engineering roles, also information security, for about 20 years. Some senior leadership positions, some senior IC positions, and we talk very openly about money and compensation. I know his complete compensation history. He knows mine. We've thrown offers back and forth. So around the new year, Phil started looking for a new job, and we had been chatting back and forth about the places he was looking, about his interviews, and then as the offers started rolling in, he started telling me about some of his offers. And one evening, I got some texts from Phil. He had been offered a compensation package of over $1 million, and he turned it down. So that's what I want to talk about. How do you make an offer when other companies are out there offering $1 million? Salaries, at least in the US, have absolutely skyrocketed over the last couple of years. I think this is starting to pause a little bit, but I don't really expect it to go down by very much. It's not uncommon for even entry-level positions to see a six-figure offer. It's pretty hard in the US to hire a mid-range engineer, someone with 3 to 5 years of experience for under 200,000 maybe. And we're even seeing, these seven-figure offers that my friend got. Certainly an outlier, but not as much as they used to be. That used to be unheard of outside of like senior executive roles, managing partner type roles. So I am operating under the assumption that most people here, most people listening are not going to be able to offer at the very, very top of this inflated range. So how do you put together a compelling offer when your dog barks at the delivery people, when you're likely to be outbid? I'm going to cover 3 aspects: cash, the company culture, and the benefits that you offer. So we've already heard that you should disclose all of this up front. Sorry, give me 1 second. I have to take care of the dog. I'm so sorry about this. Perils of working from home.
No problem. I'll jump in here. Well, I managed to get rid of my dog right before the beginning of this session, so otherwise it would have
all
been
right. You don't get that at an in-person conference, do you?
You don't indeed. Over to you. So
we've talked about disclosing up front. I'm so glad Luca made that point about the data that he saw out of hiring boards. You need to discuss all of this up front. Making this a bait and switch is just silly. If you know that you're not going to be competitive, you need to be even more clear about your compensation package. As an example, the company I work for now, we don't really do locality-based adjustment. We offer competitive salaries sort of against the national average, but that's going to be different in different locations. So when I speak to a candidate from San Francisco or New York or Portland, I have to make it pretty clear right up front that like, hey, our offer is going to look not great compared to some of the stuff you're seeing locally. And, you're going to have to decide if the other aspects we're offering are worth it. I usually do this both in the job ad and then also at the initial phone screen. And really, I want to be giving people a chance to select out. If we're going to get to the end and, the top of my range is below the bottom of theirs, we've just wasted everyone's time. So most important aspect of an offer is going to be cash. There's no getting around this. If you can afford to offer a 7-figure compensation package, then you can end your conference early. But even if you can't, you do need to be reasonably competitive. You need to know where you stand relative to the rest of the industry. You need to be making an offer that is within range for the other offers that people are looking at. If you're dramatically below what a person is expected, it's going to make you look like you're cheap, or that you haven't done your homework, or that you're trying to take advantage of someone. Not good things to show during a job ad. The best data I know here comes from paid products like the Radford surveys. If not, you can get there by looking at salary data from levels.fyi, which is very up-to-date but heavily Bay Area focused. And then a company called Robert Half publishes some pretty good locality adjustment data. I wrote a blog post about this a while back, covering this from the point of view of candidates, but that goes over the math in there for figuring out a adjusted average. By the way, this advice is mostly for the United States. I mostly hire people in the US. I know we have a lot of international people here, so hopefully there is similar information for where you are, but I'm less familiar with that. Generally, if you're trying to choose between offering more benefits or offering more cash, choose cash. If you want a funny example of this, take a look at eBay right around the holidays. You'll see tons of company gift cards showing up as companies like Home Depot and Walmart and all of those big box stores pay out bonuses and gift cards, and employees try to trade them and barter them for actual money. You should always maximize cash first before looking at other things. And you need to know what your organization's pay bands are going to be. You need to know what your upper and lower ranges, where your flexibility is and where you're not. If you're going into hiring without existing pay bands, you need to write some down. If you don't, you're basically making it up for every candidate, and that's a great recipe for inequality to sneak in. So once you've maximized your salary, once you know what you're going to offer, the next thing to think about is culture. So within roughly similar salary ranges, candidates will often choose based on the company that fits them the best. This is exactly what happened with my friend. He was being offered objectively great salaries. Even his quote unquote worst offer was still pretty fantastic. So he was free to make choices based on other things, and usually those other things is going to mean culture. And the point that I want to make about culture is that your culture, like, you're showing your culture. You're not telling people what your culture is. I don't care what your company's values page says. What you show them during your hiring process is how they're going to judge your company culture. If you make them do silly exercises as part of the interview process, they'll conclude that the work is often silly, busy work. If you're bad at communication, if it takes you days to get back to them with questions, they'll conclude that you're bad at communication. If you're late to interviews, they'll conclude that your company doesn't prioritize being on time. If you don't respect their time, and once they've started, they'll conclude that you won't respect their time later on. Luckily, you've just had an entire conference of people giving you advice on how to be kind and equitable and respectful during your hiring process. What I'm here to tell you is, if you don't take the advice that you heard earlier today, it doesn't matter how good your offer is. There's no hacks here at the offer stage to make up for a poor candidate experience. Your offer begins when they apply for the job. Keep that in mind. So the last little bit that will help people decide on jobs are benefits. And benefits are interesting. Good benefits can't really make up for low pay or a bad culture. You're not going to be able to convince someone to take a 50% pay cut because you have free lunch. But really, especially bad benefits can be a deal breaker. And great benefits can sometimes be a deciding factor. Here in the States, healthcare is a huge thing. I've had candidates who couldn't apply for jobs that I was listing because they needed a very specific insurer who wasn't offered on our healthcare plan. That's the type of thing I'm talking about, where if you have non-competitive benefits, they can sometimes be an absolute deal breaker for certain people. A trap that people fall into when they're thinking about benefits is thinking about how to offer benefits in an equitable way. You'll have someone who asks for a flexible schedule. Hey, I want to take Fridays off, work a 4-day work week. And some managers will think, well, if I offer this to this person, I have to offer it to everyone. And I can't offer it to everyone for whatever reason. But that's not how it works. Equal is not the same as equitable. You don't need to offer everyone exactly the same thing to offer people fair things. You certainly need equity, right? Everyone who's a software engineer too needs to be paid within the same pay range. And you need to offer benefits in a logical manner. If there's a reason why Jane can work a 4-day week and someone else can't, you need to be able to explain that to the other person. But it's absolutely reasonable for benefits to differ based on job duties, based on seniority, based on scope of work, based on personal circumstances, either formal accommodations or other, et cetera. And in fact, it's probably a good idea for benefits to be the place where you have a lot of flexibility, because they'll be worth different things to different people. Speaking personally, time off is hugely important to me. I do better work when I have a good amount of time to not be working. I will almost always take a pay cut in exchange for more time off, but that's not true for everyone else. If someone else has, saving up for a down payment on a house, or, is trying to maximize their savings for retirement, they might make a very different trade-off, and that is totally fine. So I want to talk about benefits in two different categories. The first is what I think of as sort of corporate benefits. These are the things that your HR department or your company is usually responsible for, and these are relatively even across all employees. You can't offer this one person a different healthcare plan than the rest of your company. You don't have a different 401k match for different people. I'm not going to go through all of these different things. I do want to focus on a couple that I think are particularly important. One is student loan repayments. A lot of managers, a lot of companies in the US don't know this, but about 2 years ago, a new law was passed that allows companies to make student loan repayments out of pre-tax money. So it's tax deductible for the company, putting it in the same categories like 401k matches. This can be a really key benefit, especially if you're hiring people somewhat earlier in their careers where they may still have student loans. A lot of times people think about 401k match, but they don't think about student loan repayments. And so you end up offering better benefits to people who are later in their careers than earlier, which is not great. The other really good one to think about is what I think of as company culture benefits, things that align with what your company is trying to do. I have a friend who works for a sports fitness company. They make like watches and stuff for runners, and they offer free entry to races. They'll basically pay race entry fees for everyone who works there, and this aligns super well with what the company is doing. Right, they're making equipment for athletes and they're subsidizing their employees who are athletes. These are the type of fun little things that just go a long way towards sending a message about your company culture through the benefits that you offer. Now, you probably don't have as much direct control over corporate benefits. Unless you're an executive or at a very small company, you probably can't change your healthcare plan or your 401k match. But you should be aware of what they are and where they stand relative to the industry, and if they're bad, you should be pushing for an improvement as a over time as a strategic factor. In contrast, there are a number of benefits that you probably do have a lot of control over, and these are team level benefits. These are things that you can control on behalf of your team. I'm seeing some discussion about dogs in the chat, so this would absolutely be a team level benefit. If you have a physical workspace, you might be able to figure out a way to make your team either pro dog or no dogs, depending on the specific makeup of your specific team. And this doesn't have to be something that applies to the entire company, maybe depending on the physical layout of your office or whatever. Time off is also something you have a lot of control of as a manager. Remote work, certainly. A big one is getting to work on a diverse team. You absolutely have control over that as a manager. If you hire a diverse team, you will attract a more diverse team. Opportunity for advancement is another huge one. A lot of time managers think they don't have a ton of power here. And the main message I want to send here is you have a lot more power over these team level benefits than you might think. I like to encourage managers to follow what I call the reserved powers doctrine. The 10th Amendment of the US Constitution says that the powers not delegated, not explicitly assigned to Congress, are implicitly assigned to the state. And I like to encourage managers to behave that way with their team. Anything that the company hasn't said is a company responsibility is implicitly your responsibility. So if your company hasn't said that you can't allow a flexible schedule, then allow a flexible schedule. If your company hasn't said that you can't give someone additional time off, give them additional time off. Generally, unless you have a good relationship with HR, this is like a little bit of real politic here. Typically, don't ask HR unless you know that you have a good one. They tend to focus on equal over equitable. I would start with your boss. And if your boss says yes, then take yes for an answer. And escalate if you must. Getting the talent you want on your team. I mean, look, as a manager, you're going to be judged based on the performance of your team. So hiring the right person to help your team perform is absolutely a hill worth dying on. In some circumstances, it might be worth it making an under the table deal. If HR has said you can't have, you can't allow people to have a 4-day work week. Is it the worst thing in the world to tell that person, hey, you know what? You just don't work on Friday and I won't ask you for anything on Friday and we'll leave it at that. This is risky for you and even more so for the candidate. So you need to be transparent about them, let them know like, hey, this is a special deal. We have to be careful with this or something like that. But it's not the worst thing in the world. I've done it on occasion on both sides of that sort of under the table deal, and it can be okay, but be careful with that one. So in the last couple of minutes, I want to talk about the logistics of actually making the offer. So speed is really important here. Your candidate is interviewing, the candidate you love is interviewing elsewhere. As soon as you've made the decision, like I'm talking like, within minutes of making the decision, send them something saying, hey, we're going to make you an offer. This is why you need to know all of the previous things I've talked about really inside and out. You need to be able to have all the pieces together, even if a formal offer letter is going to take longer. Send them an email that says, hey, we're going to make you an offer. It's going to be for this amount. We've discussed benefits. Let me know what you think. And the formal offer letter will be, in your inbox tomorrow or whenever that's going to be. Email is totally fine here. You'll read weird old advice that like you have to call people to make offers. I don't, whatever, send an email. It's fine. Speed is really the important thing. You want to get this out the moment you know that this is the person you're going to make an offer to. Don't play games. Make the best offer you possibly can. This isn't the time to try to save, to try to save $5,000 on an offer. You have a range. Your interview will have established the candidate's position within that range, middle of the range, bottom of the range, top of the range. Make them an offer where they are on that range. Make the best offer you possibly can. This is advice that's usually given to candidates, but it applies to managers as well. Remember that when you're negotiating the entire package. You're not just going back and forth on the base salary. If they ask for a number for base salary that's above the top of your range, talk about everything else. Tell them, okay, that's, the top of our range is whatever, so I can't go up from there, but here are all the ways that I can be flexible. What works for you? You should definitely expect negotiation and be gracious about it. If you're a jerk when someone counteroffers, you'll probably lose them, or at the very least, you'll start off your relationship with this person on a pretty poor footing. And lastly, if you can't come to terms, it's just business. No hard feelings. Be gracious. Thank them for their time. Offer to keep in touch. You never know when you'll see them again for another job. Maybe you'll be on the other side of the interviewing table later in your career. It is never a bad idea to be very nice to someone at the very end of a negotiation. So that's my time. I may have a couple minutes for questions. We'll let Andy decide on that one. But if you like what I had to say today, you'll probably like the stuff I wrote on my blog. I write about management, mostly from an engineering manager perspective, and a lot about hiring. You can follow me on the Bird site. And if there are questions that you want to ask me, you really can email me, jacob@jacobian.org. I have no SLA for responses, but I generally try to respond to everyone who emails me at some point. And thanks again for the invite. Really enjoyed being here.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jacob. We don't have any questions from the audience, so we'll wrap it up there. But that was really insightful. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks again.
Grand. Okay. That is that. We've had some amazing insights from everyone, obviously. Just to remind you, we're going to keep the conversation going in the CTO Craft Slack. So if you're an engineering leader and not a member yet, make sure you sign up, and then you can keep going with the conversation. We'll be bringing in all the unanswered questions. So if you want to get some of those answered, that's the place to do it. And you just need to go to the CTO Craft website to find out how to join. So I'd like to finish up just by thanking all our sponsors again for their support, including but not limited to Skiller Whale, Pentalog, O'Reilly and the Software House. Also a huge thanks and congratulations to Nick, Valentina, Megan, Sarah, Emma C and Emma G, the CTO Craft team who've helped make this just an amazing event, as well as our amazing creative committee who help us shape the content and events that we produce for you. I'd also like to quickly thank Andy Hassoun for all his support and advice. But most of all, we'd like to give our thanks and appreciation to the whole CTO Craft community, every single one of you. You've given us so much support and creative input over the last 5 years. We really could not do it without you. There's lots more to come. Watch this space. So that's it. Drop us a line if you're interested in finding out more about how CTO Craft can support you in your journey. You're not alone. See you soon.